and welcome back to the open session portion of our regular Board of Education meeting on July 21st, 2021. Apologies for the late start, but we are ready to rock and roll. Roll call, please.
Oops, here. Yeah, here.
Mr. Valencia?
Here.
Mrs. Flora?
Here.
Mr. Lara?
Here.
Mr. Darrell?
Present. We are returning from closed session. We have not yet covered item A, public employee performance evaluation, but on item B, conference with labor negotiators regarding CSEA, and C, conference with labor negotiators, SMEA information was shared. Let's please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. Right hand, ready, begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Our calendar for upcoming meetings and activities. Our next regular board meeting is August 11th, 2021, which is the day before our very first day back to school on August 12th, 2021. And then our next board meeting will be September 8th, 2021. Before we begin this evening, I would just like to take a moment to recognize our superintendent. He's looking, it's not on the agenda. And express our appreciation for the 5 years that he has been with us. Seems like only yesterday, quite honestly, but since July 1st, 2016. And thank you to Ms. Cornejo for keeping us on track. So congratulations.
Thank you.
And
Thank you so much.
You get your 5-year pin. Congratulations, boss.
that means you can go on to first grade.
Good job. Well, as I did kindergarten multiple times as a child.
Okay, public comment. Open session. The public comments are intended for members of the public to address the Board of Education on items involving the school district. Such testimony shall be limited to 3 minutes each, or 450 words per person or subject, and 15 minutes total for each topic. If an answer to a specific question is requested, the board president will, if appropriate, direct administration to respond in writing. Do we have comments on agenda items?
We do have one comment on an agenda item.
Okay.
On the school reopening item. And no comments on non-agenda items.
Okay. So on the agenda item, are we going to wait until we get to that on the agenda? All right, very well. Thank you. Approval of the agenda.
If I
I'll
could,
move to approve the agenda as presented.
before we take action, I'd like to, item 8A was an information item. The information was not included with the agenda. And so I talked to Mrs. Loftus and she said there's no time frame on that. So we'd like to bring that back to the next meeting. So I'd like to pull item 8A.
Okay. Move to approve the agenda as revised and presented.
I second.
All right, the revised agenda, a motion has been made by Mr. Hollinshead and seconded by Mrs. Flores. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? And on our consent agenda, actions proposed for the consent agenda are consistent with adopted policies and approved practices of the district and are deemed routine in nature. They will be acted upon by roll call vote in one motion without discussion unless members of the board request an item's removal from the consent agenda, in which event it will be taken up in the order indicated on the main agenda.
I move to approve the consent agenda.
And Linda, instead of a second, one thing that I did want to bring up with the board is for item B, the approval of the governance policies, accountability, consultation, and advisory. I know for me as the newest board member, it's a large quantity of policies all at once. And we also have a variety of different action items, right, for this agenda. So I know for me, I would really appreciate a little bit more time, like for this to be brought up at the next board meeting, just so that I can really process the documents better to see how they're going to impact our district. But if the majority of the board feels that, that this must be passed now, then, I'll be okay with that. I just know for me personally, I could use a little bit more time to dig into these policies a little bit more deeply, so that I could make a better informed vote. So I would request that be tabled for our next board meeting, the item B on the consent agenda.
Okay, item D as in dog,
B as in boy.
B as in,
B is in boy.
Yeah, is that what it is? The board policy and administrative regulations? Because we have a variety of them, right? that we've
yes,
been
we
looking at.
do.
Yeah.
So is that B as in
124
boy
pages.
as well as D? Yeah. Yeah. it was-
124 pages.
Yeah, so that's what I'm requesting. Yeah, for B and for D, I believe it would be, which is basically the totality of all of those board and administrative regulations, just so that I can have a little bit more time to digest them and to come up with any questions.
Okay, so would you like them placed on the regular agenda tonight or at another time?
At another time, at our next board meeting.
Is
So
that
that means we
anything?
won't get to them till August 11th.
I mean, I would say that we spent 2 sessions going through them.
We did. Yeah.
Provided the board has had the items for 6 weeks for review, so,
I say we just go forward as is.
I mean, I guess we'd look for consensus for Mr. Valencia's request, because he's talking about,
Okay,
he's not talking, he's talking about pulling it from the consent agenda, he's talking about pulling it from this evening's agenda. And there needs to be, I mean, that's a motion to remove it from the agenda.
Yes.
That would take consensus of the board, or majority.
Can I, point of clarification, you want it removed from this consent agenda and replaced on the next consent agenda?
Correct, for our next board meeting.
Because we've just, I think Mr. Montaveros is saying, I agree, is we've discussed them.
right.
So, but if you want more, you're saying you want more some time to
Yeah, to really.
marinate.
Exactly. That's just for me. But again, that's because I'm the newest member of this board, right? So for me, it takes me a little bit more time to process. And like you said, it's a lot of policies all at once, but if the will of the board is to move forward, then I will respect that. I just know I'm just being honest of what I need to be, an effective board member at this moment. But that's just my request.
Okay. I'm in a little bit of a quandary here.
Well, I've reviewed them piece at a time and then reviewed them. I'm good as what we've had. I mean, we've had, like you said, 6 weeks, a month and a half to look these over.
I'm just wondering if there's a particular one or,
No, not a particular one. It's just that I remember when we were sent the documents of our old board policies, right? Because some of them haven't been updated in like 30 years. I remember when we received them, looking at all of them at once, for me, it was a little bit confusing. All right, this is the old proposed one. This is the newer one, right? So it took me a long time to review all of these policies because there's, I don't know how many in total, but seems like at least 10 different policies, right, that we're updating. So I know that's why for me, even though we had the first reading a couple of weeks ago, but it was during one of our marathon board sessions, like toward the very end. So I didn't necessarily have time to read it that time in the board, but I read it independently, right, on my own time, of course. And I still feel like I need more time to really understand the spirit behind them and to really be able to make an informed decision, informed vote. Because what I don't want to do is just pass something because I've been able to read it once and then, okay, like it's done. That's why I feel like I would request more time for the next board meeting to be able to vote for them. But that's just for myself, for my needs as a newest board member.
I get it. It is overwhelming. I did go through them all. I didn't see any huge changes.
Yes.
Did I miss
Yes.
something? Because
No,
I
didn't see it.
look at agreement with the newer language, the
Yes.
LCAP structure. I look to make sure that the responsibilities were what we were evaluating with Luke in terms of the superintendent. I looked at the different pieces with the academic student timeframe, the instruction, the change in the selection and evaluation of instructions.
Mhm.
The negotiation consult piece was a piece that I really want to make sure is updated. So that's why I would like to move forward. But if there's not a consensus, then we'll have to not move forward.
I think Ricardo's given us consensus. I mean, consensus
Yes.
is
Yeah.
truly
Yes.
that we believe, and I think that's his acknowledgement is that if for us to move forward, for him to concede that he'll do that
Absolutely.
to a greater degree moving forward and ask questions when he needs to, then we'll move forward.
Yes, absolutely. If the majority of the board, the will of the board is to move forward, I'm okay with that. For me, I feel like it's such an abundance of policies all at once, right? That I think it behooves me individually as a board member and us to make sure that we have the time to really do it, because some board packets come thicker than others, right? Some require 10 hours to get through, right? Some require 5. And so that's why I'm bringing this up, because I would hate to pass something without feeling like I fully understood it, right? Especially if this is our policy. And for me, that's why I feel like it would have made more sense to do maybe 2 at a time, if you will, and spread them out. But if there was a need to do all of them at once, then hey, okay, I get it. But I didn't see anything that was like, wow, no, like this is like really weird or something. No, everything that I saw seemed okay. But again, it was such an abundance of them that I felt like very overwhelmed with the amount of policies we're passing all at once.
And if I could interject, that's when I presented them in the fashion I did because they do overlap.
A lot.
It's difficult to approve one and then have them, then you've got a gap. And so the purpose,
Right.
and especially because so many of them refer to status that no longer exists, right? I mean, we're talking about using the API, and so many things have been out of vogue for decades.
Yes.
But again, it's
To your credit, Ricardo, you made, I think, a lot of really good contributions to the discussion on those. So I think you don't give yourself enough credit for having a wherewithal on the take on how.
You know more than you think.
Yeah, a lot of language that CSBA's given us and stuff. I think we're probably ready to move forward.
Great.
Yeah.
I think we are.
Great. Then I'm definitely, let's consent. Let's move forward with the consent agenda. All of them as is. Thank
I
you.
appreciate your comment and your honesty, though.
Okay,
Thank
so
you.
we're back to John. You made the motion to approve consent
I'll
agenda.
second.
Mr. Laura made the second. Roll call, please.
Mr. Hollinshead,
Aye. Wait, aye.
Mr. Valencia,
Aye.
Mrs. Flores,
Aye.
Mr. Lara,
Aye.
Mrs. Cordero.
Aye. Thank you. Moving on to action item A, approval of board policy and administrative regulation 6158, independent study. Mr. Ontiveros.
no, this one is mine.
very, very new development. Because of legislative action that has been extremely recent. And while this is, I think,
It does it by itself. There's a very, as I was saying, this is something that is extremely new, has come out of the legislature at what we hope, the remnants of our COVID lockdown, and in preparation for fully reopening. And we must have this policy in place before school can begin. So we will be asked to take action tonight.
I appreciate those comments. Can you see you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. It was up on the big screen before, so. No, that's fine. I'm good with the little one. I just want to make sure everybody else can see it. I appreciate that comment, Ms. Cordero, because that was really where I was going to begin. This is a very recent development in terms of board policy that came out of SB 130, which was the trailer legislation to the budget. And so normally when we bring policies, it's a first reading to come back for us, a second reading and approval. In this case, because of the conditions that Mrs. Cordero mentioned, the requirement is that this policy has to be in place by the start of school. I'm gonna spend some time going through this. Normally, this would be a Dr. Zimmerman policy, or maybe even a Matt Beecher policy, because there's funding attached to this. But because this is connected to the reopening of school, I'm going to address this issue, and then I've got an update on reopening as well. So this would be a big part of that. So I may talk longer now and shorter later. I know you prefer shorter both ways, but I'll try and keep it brief. And I want to acknowledge, before I even get into this, Kristen was miraculous in just hammering CSBA around, hey, we need, we really need your help. I've been in several webinars over the last few weeks around this development. And as the legislation was unwound, we're really depending on a legal, something that we can hang our hat on in terms of policy. And last night about, I don't know, it was about 5 o'clock, Kristen, I was hiding, it was in Matt's office. And I had left my phone in the back room, so she's trying to call me because it actually came through. So that's why I sent all of you just the drafts last night so late, because I was working on it last night, and I'm prepared to share it today. So again, these are the modifications to independent study, to the board policy, and the administrative regulation that are required by the implementation of SB 130. And so I'm going to go backwards a little bit just to recap from the last presentation, just to bridge the gap that Mrs. Cordero was alluding to with the adoption of the budget. When we met the last time on the 23rd, we were still in that waiting period for the budget to be approved. We knew what the proposals were, but hadn't seen the finality. And so from the meeting on the 23rd, we talked about public health considerations, the OSHA standards. I will talk about those in the information item later on reopening. This number 3, the budget and the proposed impact on reopening, is really what SB 30 has addressed. So these were all the health pieces. So I'm going to skip over that for now. Skip over the budget pieces, other than this, what I covered the last time were just these points that, again, the return to in-person instruction. So school will be starting for us on August 12th. There are distance learning considerations that at that point we're still under development, and that's really what has led to this, the rewriting of the board policy 6158 and AR 6158. So this trailer legislation, I just want to quickly, and I think you probably have seen these, but there's just been such a rush of information over the last couple of weeks. So this is the CSBA's overview of SB 130, which was passed on July 5th. This was written on the 7th, and I'm only going to touch on the independent study portion, but I do want to cover some of the other pieces that are in there that are going to have some downstream implications for us. And so this was the trailer bill. The first on the list is independent study, which I'll cover here in a minute, all these detail points. Universal TK implementation is something that's on the horizon for us that we're going to need to be aware of. We've got a 2-year planning time with that first implementation, 2 years from the school year that we're about to embark on. There's some real challenges there that we're already working on. Matt and his team are really looking at doing an audit of what does classroom space look like, because we've always talked about maybe making some room for full day kindergarten, and now we're adding TK on top. So there's some real implications there. A lot of the expanded learning opportunities that are available that were alluded to indirectly through the study session, but that's another whole plan that's below the water level that we've got teams working on. This A through G completion improvement grant really dedicated towards high school development, but it really impacts us because as the biggest feeder to Santa Maria Joint Union High School District, it's really the nexus for the importance of ensuring that we're providing students with high quality grade level instruction. Ethnic studies, the trailer bill adds funding to develop and expand $50 million in 21-22 for grades 9-12 to support the curriculum instructional resources. And then creating consortiums to support offering expanded, really to build a much broader, it was alluded to in the presentation as well. How do we bolster that so when kids get to that 9-12 level that they're prepared and connected to the benefits of ethnic studies and all the connected strategies and impacts tied to it. Additional money for career technical education, community schools, to really do some management around partnerships, community resources, brought an expansion of broadband. There was some allocation to teacher retention and school nutrition, special education. We got an actual COLA on special education for the first time since I can remember. There were some charter bill pieces, and then and that's the entirety of SB 130. But the one that's relevant to the reopening of school, which is so timely, is, as Mrs. Cordero mentioned, is this connection to independent study. And so I will share this presentation with each of you. I just want to quickly go through the CDE issued a letter to superintendents last Thursday, the 15th, that really describes the changes to independent study. And so I'm going to quickly go over this, and I've got some slides that we participated in a county meeting on Monday that has it broken down in more detail. So this first portion, independent study offering for the 21-22 school year, this is specific to this school year. School districts are required to offer independent study as an educational option. In addition, this last paragraph on the first page, AB 130 requires all LEAs to include a plan for offering independent study to pupils affected by school closures from September 1st, 2021, and is not limited to the 21-22 school year. So this is really the hedge in our bets around if we have some type of a spike that's going to cause some closures, you have to be prepared. And this is where the descriptions of independent study are so important in this new legislation and the policy. Parent notification. In order to communicate the educational options for families, AB 130 has a requirement that school districts notify parents and guardians of their options to enroll their pupil in-person instruction or independent study during the 2021 school year. And I'll talk a little bit about that in the school reopening item later. Pupil parent educator conferences prior to signing the independent study written agreement, a parent or guardian at a parent or guardian's request. LEAs offering independent study must hold a conference, must involve everyone who signs the agreement, because there's always been with independent study, there has to be a signed contract. There's 8 specific criteria that have had historically been met. They're re-articulated in the policy and the law. They've just been tweaked a little bit, and I'll go over that in greater detail. And here's the part about updated board policies. And so in order to generate apportionment for independent study, all LEAs must have adopted and implemented board policies and written agreements that meet these new requirements. The board policies need to be updated to include a definition of satisfactory progress as an added means to evaluate continued instructional independent study participation and placement. A provision that standards align content in independent study is substantially equivalent to the quality and intellectual challenge of in-person instruction. There's a high school piece that A through G courses are required to be offered through independent study. That there are procedures for tiered re-engagement strategies. This comes out of the distance learning criteria last year. When kids weren't participating, we had to have a way to reconnect with them, and there were some criteria. A plan to provide opportunities for synchronous instruction for all grade levels and live interaction for grades 4 through 8. This is a big change to independent study, because independent study has historically been child's going to be out of school. I think our current policy is up for 20 days. A contract is up to 20 days. So that the time it could be, you provide the work and you don't see the child back until after 20 days. It's to be determined by the contract. This new description has to embed in synchronous instruction for grades K through 8. And I'll get into a little more detail about that. A plan to transition pupils whose families wish to return to in-person instruction from independent study expeditiously and not later than 5 instructional days. Now, I've always thought that 5 instructional days is pretty expeditious, but this says expeditiously, but not to exceed 5. So if there's a request to return to in-person, has to be facilitated within 5 days.
Within 5 days from the time it was recorded.
And what has happened, particularly over the districts that opened distance or independent study academies and things in terms of during the pandemic, kids, once they were there, they were required to remain in some instances because all those resources were shifted. Yeah. And then when they realized, you know what, this isn't working so well, I want to send my child back. They weren't allowed, because of the term of the contract extended. You had to work through the contract. This says if somebody wants your child back, have to be back minimum 5 days. And then the written agreements are a little, and I'll go through that in a little more detail. I got a side by side with the ed code. So for the 21-22 school year only, written agreements must be signed no later than 30 days after the first day of instruction. This is a change because normally in an independent study contract, it has to be signed prior to the initiation. This gives a grace period so if somebody wants to start an independent study, to work out the details and get the contract signed within that first 30 days. It's important to note that all other independent study requirements must be met upon commencement of instruction. So there still is a provision for short-term independent study that wouldn't be based on not returning to in-person. There's still a provision for, say, somebody's going to visit family for 2 weeks. That there still is a provision for that short-term that doesn't hold all these requirements, and that'll be in the piece that I include as well. But anyway, so there was 2 pages with more. My first touch on independent study that I can recall was back in like 1987. Hadn't really changed much other than there was a switch back in the, I think, the late 90s. Independent study contract could be for no less than 5 days, because you used to be able to do them for 1, 2, or 3 days, and they made a change when they made the change in excused absences for apportionment. I think it was back in 96 or 97. But since then, it hasn't changed much at all. And so this is a big change, which is why I appreciate Kristen bird dogging CSBA so we could get this tonight, so we can get these things in place. Oop, what did I do? And so I'm going to go through here at the end of this, these model templates for each of them in a very similar fashion to what I did previously, what our current policy is, what the existing or what the recommendation is, and then what the change would look like And then at your place setting this evening, Kristen, these are the clean, what the copies of the proposed policies that meet the SB 130 requirements look like. So just to cover some of the broad strokes within the changes, in the existing ed code, there was an allowable time for assignment permission, and there was a number of missed assignments allowed before a child was no longer offered independent study, because it's always been a voluntary placement. So the changes here are that performance levels on standardized tests are a measurement of satisfactory progress. The standards and concepts to be learned have to be articulated and met to meet the requirement of satisfactory progress. Whoops. To establish progress required toward course completion. So it's got to be commensurate with the time that a child would be out. And that's always been in the law. But any, Ricardo or Vita or Lindy always know when you had a student on an independent study, it was never equivalent to what was happening in your class. It was really, hey, here's some of the stuff we're going to be working on. And it was more time laden because the evaluation of that contract gave us apportionment for days and what's the equivalency of time. This is really more performance based. And then there's this provision for the plan to transition pupils out of program in less than 5 days if they're not meeting those requirements or if the parent requests. So that's a big change. So that what that suggests is there's got to be some flexibility between the two.
So the plan to transition pupils, is that from the time they start and then you're evaluating them as they're doing their homework? If you transition them back into the classroom?
Either way, if a parent says, hey, I'm ready, or say this isn't working, you can't say, hey, we'll meet in 2 weeks and determine, right?
Good, okay.
And there was some allusion to that in some of the content of the policies about how, there's been some lag historically in some instances, and they're really trying to nip that in the bud, particularly in terms of, mitigating the lost opportunity that kids had over the last 20 months.
Luke,
Yes.
are kids assigned to a classroom?
This is just the policy. We're going to talk about that in the next piece. Yeah. Again, that's a great question, though.
For performance based, all I can think of is, okay, how are they going to know?
There are some other conditions in here that yeah. And again, when we get to the reopening item, that's really going to be where I want to talk about that a little more in detail.
Thank you.
You bet. In the existing ed code, the requirement is that the independent study is designed to teach the knowledge and skills of the core curriculum, not an alternative curriculum. Now the class and course content are required to be equivalent to what is used for in-person instruction. And again, when we sent kids on, a trip across the country, what they were doing was generally out of a book. It wasn't equivalent. And then this requirement that the availability of high school courses offered for graduation A through G criteria must be offered through independent study. This whole notion of tiered re-engagement strategies, and again, this comes out of distance learning. Previously, an evaluation is conducted to determine the best educational option for the people, because again, independent study was voluntary at that point. A written record of the findings of any evaluation is treated as a mandatory interim pupil record, goes into the child's CUME academic record. And students with less than 15 total days do not require re-engagement. So you'd have that 15-day contract, and if they're not performing, there was no expectation that you had to do anything if it was less than 15-day contract. And in fact, a lot of times we didn't know how the kids were doing because we weren't in contact with them. Right? If they were out of the country, or you didn't really know until they came back, and you'd ask them for work, and if it wasn't done, we just back into class. The ed code changes when there's no attendance for more than 3 days or 60% of the instructional days per week, initiates tiered re-engagement strategies. Again, that comes right out of the distance learning provisions from last year. And so the strategies include in terms of the contract, verifying contact information, notifying parent or guardian, outreach from school, and standard for a conference to pull folks in if they're not within that, performing within that short period of time. The opportunities for student interaction. This goes to really kind of points to the question you asked, Vita. Under existing education code, certificated employees and each pupil shall communicate in person, by telephone, or by any other live visual or audio connection no less than twice per calendar month. No less, right? And that's, I mean, in my previous district, we ran an independent, a contract independent study program for years. And kids came in and met with a teacher every 2 weeks. And as long as they were doing all the work, then they got credit, they got academic credit, and that's how it, and there was no expectation for contact in between. And again, this notion of students with less than 15 total days do not require, those are really those short-term contracts. There's not a requirement. So it's those expectations really more for longer term. In this, under this, the SB 30 changes, TK through 3 must have the opportunity for daily synchronous instruction, real time, with a certificated employee engaged in learning. 4 through 8 must have the opportunity for daily live interaction, and I'll get to the definitions here in a minute, and weekly synchronous instruction, because this is going to be harder to pull off in like a multiple teacher setting, junior high, and then 9-12. It's going to really be challenging. 9-12 must have the opportunity for weekly synchronous instruction. So that daily interaction is not a requirement on the high school level. For us, TK through 3 must have the opportunity for daily synchronous instruction. 4 through 8 have the opportunity for daily live interaction and weekly synchronous instruction. So that's minimally. So here's the definitions. Live interaction is interaction with certificated, there's an extra id in there. I stole this from the county, or classified staff. Live interaction may include peers. So you could connect with more than one child. And live interaction is for the purpose of maintaining connectedness. So all the things we know about, you know, the loss of distance learning of that connection, it's really the point of maintaining a connection with the school sites. Synchronous instruction definitions: classroom style, small group, or individual instruction. Two-way live communication between teacher and pupil, and this really is alluding to the point that you raised, Vita, provided by the teacher of record. Right? So that really means that you're assigned to someone. Now, what shape that takes is really going to depend on the scope and width of the numbers of students that we're talking about. And again, I'll address that more in the next item. So the written agreement requirements, the existing ed code has a process for submitting and reporting pupil progress, and it's generally at the end of the contract term. There's a maximum length of time allowed for assignments, and the duration of the independent study agreement is included. In this new design, specific resources, including materials and personnel, that will be made available to the pupil during the time. And again, you think about how historically you're off on your own, and this is who you're going to have access to. And the level of satisfactory educational progress must be defined as well as part of the written agreement. Additionally, the agreement must state the number of course credits that the contract will produce, because previously it was for attendance purposes. You got daily apportionment depending on the percentage of the contract work completed. It must include that statement that independent study is an educational option, or that was the prior, the existing ed code. And then each written agreement shall be signed prior to initiation. That's always been existing. So now it's support, including services and resources for academics, mental health, and basic student needs. So historically, there have been instances where children are on independent study and truly independent. This is if there's an identified need that has to be part of the provision. And then written agreements may be used may be signed using an electronic signature that complies with state and federal standards. I always required that the signed document. That's when we used to get audited. They'd come and look in the drawer at your contracts and want to see this supporting work, and this allows an electronic signature. And again, the signed written agreement completed within 30 days of the beginning of school for children that start at early. Independent study that offered to all parents and guardians is an option. We want everybody to come back in person, but they have to be made aware of this is an option. And again, in the reopening, I'll share some of the preliminary surveys that we've sent out. And then offer the parent or guardian a conference prior to signing the written agreement. So there has to be a connection. On the existing education code, apportionment credit is claimed according to the time value of the pupil work products. It's good, again, because it was related primarily to attendance apportionment. Here's some challenging parts. Must record the student participation in live interaction and synchronous instruction. Yep, the participation. So it goes back to that, remember last year when we didn't really have attendance, but you had to log participation? That's carry over into this piece. Have to track student engagement in coursework. So this goes back to that participation engagement piece that was in the distance learning. And the annual audits for K-12 on the accounting side will, I'm sorry. Do you have a question?
I was just mentioning to be at Cat's ear.
Oh.
Or we have to get breaking.
Oh, I got it down. I'm looking at the
He's looking at the big screen. And your audit will include a recording of that tracking of participation and engagement. And then finally, under the existing education code, independent study students are included in annual statewide data collection. CalPADS does periodic data collection, so CalPADS will include fields for the number of students participating. And I think that what's also come out of this, I've shared it several times, we had that over the spring, we had to update on that school reopening hub, your opening status. I believe that this is going to come out as well. What percentage of your children are in independent study? Some version. So those are kind of some of the changes that are alluded to. And so this is, as I put together this workshop, this is what I shared with you. I emailed to you late last night. And just by volume, this is our current board policy. And we just updated it in May of 2019, a little over a page, right? And it really is more a statement of purpose. You know, it's an optional alternative instructional strategy, continuously voluntary, no student may be required to participate. May be provided only if the student is offered a classroom option that is always available. And so you could always come back, right? There wasn't a requirement for the quick turnaround. Offers a means of individualizing learning plans for students whose needs may be best met through study outside of a classroom setting. You have to describe the requirements. The board establishes for all students the maximum length of time, and for us it was 20 days on a specific contract. And so this was our criteria. When any student fails to complete 50% of the assignment in any given subject in one contract period, the superintendent shall conduct an evaluation. So this new requirement is if they're not participating 60% of any 5-day period, you got to bring them back, got to re-engage. Yep. So that was a little over a page. I'm just going to quickly scroll through. This is what the new, and it's really everything that I just covered, and I'll go through it more slowly. But it went from being a one-page policy statement to now it's really operational. 7-8 pages of all these new requirements.
11.
Oh, was it 11? I'm sorry. Yeah.
Well, 10 and a third.
It's its own, it really is. It's changed it entirely. The short term is still there, the 15 days if you're going somewhere, but if you choose, and there's some conditions for choosing that are important to note. So this minimum period of time for any independent study option shall be 3 consecutive school days. That's down from 5. Again, this points out that for 21-22, the district shall offer independent study. 2022-23, the thing that I mentioned that you've got to be prepared to re-engage. This is the statement that I was alluding to before. Because excessive leniency in the duration of independent study assignments may result in a student falling behind peers and increase the risk of dropping out of school, independent study assignments shall be completed no more than 1 week after assigned for all grade levels and types of programs. So this is the hedge against the 4, or in some instances, I think the Ed Code allowed for a contract to be up to 40 days. That you wouldn't really you wouldn't know until the end of 40 days how much a child missed. And so this says within that week. So it talks about how the evaluation shall be conducted, and these are the criteria. You know, the achievement engagement by performance on student level measured, the learning of required concepts, and the progress towards successful completion of the course of study or individual course. And we'll talk a little bit about that a little further down. This is the more the design pieces. So this is the delineation between that short-term and long-term. The superintendent designee shall ensure that students participating in independent study for 15 school days or more receive the following throughout the school year. So for students in TK, kindergarten, and grades 1 to 3, opportunities for daily synchronous instruction. That's not just do your contract at home. There's got to be a daily connection. And then this, go ahead.
It says opportunities for daily synchronous instruction. Yes. Okay, so let's say I want to take my child out of school because we are going to travel. It's something to do with family, it doesn't matter, but we're going to be gone for 10 school days, and I want my child to have some work to do. But it may not be possible.
And so those under 15 days, these requirements aren't. This is for in excess of 15 days.
Okay.
So these are for the, and that's, and again, but I'm glad you asked the question, Linda, because that's really been the push and pull this whole time was, we've always done short term. You're telling me a kid's going to go skiing and he's got to log in every day? I mean, not that we have a log, right? But for whatever.
Okay.
So this is really for those more extended times. I'm glad you asked that question because I read through it about 10 times. Because I kept hearing in these conversations I've had through these webinars, I kept hearing, well, what about short-term independent study? Well, now short-term is defined as less than 15. So if it's more than 15, this is where these provisions kick in. So thank you for asking that.
So they could be on independent study all year.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
As long as they're turning in the work and they're
making progress.
And they're engaging in synchronous instruction on a regular, you know, it's the difference is if you got 3 days in a row, so that child, if they miss 3 out of 5 days, then we've got to initiate that re-engagement.
Yeah.
Well, what if they miss Monday, Wednesday, Friday?
That would be 3 out of 5
That would
days.
be,
still 3 out of
okay.
5.
Yeah. Now there may be a legitimate reason, right? If let's say that I schedule my daily synchronous time with a child every morning, and Monday, Wednesday, Friday they're sick, right? And so that some of the other requirements are you've got to make. That's why you have to maintain that daily interaction to know why. For students in grades 4 through 8, opportunities for both daily live interaction and at least weekly synchronous instruction, at least weekly. And then for grades 9, 12, those opportunities for at least weekly synchronous instruction. This is going to be a real challenge for high schools.
No.
Okay, so stop. What does that look like?
For high school? I don't
No,
know.
for students in grades 4 through 8, opportunities for both daily live interaction and at least weekly synchronous instruction. So let's say the teacher wants independent study students to all tune in on Thursday. But on the other 4 days, the daily live interaction would mean that they would have to be virtually present to work with peer groups or,
That could be an example. Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
I just,
In the AR, there are some descriptions.
okay,
And again, we'll talk a little bit more when we talk about what our return to school, because we're going to have to figure out what this looks like. Right. Again, so this is just, these are the requirements that we've got to have in place. So, yeah, so there's still some questions, still some problems to be solved. But again, I'm going to hold that until we get to the reentry, the
Okay.
reopening piece.
so in our board policy, do we need to address the requirements for grades 9 through 12?
No, we do not.
Okay,
And then this talks about these procedures for tiered re-engagement in the event, what you described, Linda, that there is, we're verifying that we're in contact.
okay,
You've got to ascertain why is it they aren't participating. And then there's got to be a plan to determine the needs and, to review the program and find out, is this working or not? Because if it's not going to work, then the expectation is they get re-engaged back into daily live instruction. So then this next paragraph where I got the cursor, so after that re-engagement evaluation, the superintendent designee shall develop a plan to transition students whose families wish to return to in-person instruction from an independent study expeditiously. And this requirement applies only to those students participating in independent study for 15 days or more.
Yeah.
So that short-term contract doesn't fall into those requirements. And then we talk about master agreements, and those are the 8 criteria that we've always had, which is here. For the 21-22 school year only, the district shall obtain a written agreement for independent study no later than 30 days after the first day. So that's a waiver of that signature before just for this year. And then these are all the pieces that have always been in the independent study law. The agreement has to include all these things: name, address, birth level, date, school of enrollment, and then define these elements: the frequency, time, place, manner. Those have always been in the contract. Objectives and methods of studies. This is new. The specific resources that are made available, including materials and personnel, and access to internet connectivity and devices. So this is really suggesting that the daily live interaction, synchronous instruction, there has to be a provision made for that distance learning concept. Yeah.
okay, so another question.
Yep.
You have 30 days to set this up. So let's say a parent, well, right now says, I'm not going to have my student return, and I want he or she to be on independent study. Are we operational to get that in place?
Hold that thought until I get to the
Okay.
school reopening piece. This is just a policy.
Okay.
We're gonna have policy
You can lay it
first.
all out before we open.
I mean, these are all the things that are just swimming in my mind.
Yeah, well, and this was swimming in my mind as I was reading it for the first time last night too. And then the description of the beginning, ending time, all the pieces that I went through in those checklists. And then this number 10 is new. Before the commencement of independent study, the agreement shall be signed and dated by the student. However, for the 21-22 school year, the district shall only obtain a written agreement within 30 days. So that's that waiver just for this year, which really lends itself to your question, Linda. We're gonna figure this thing out, right? So historically, we've had contracts. Well, I would only speak for myself as a teacher. The principal would usually, they tell me on Thursday, hey, this kid's going to come to you tomorrow. He's going to be gone for 2 weeks. I need to give him 2 weeks worth of work. Right?
I remember.
You ever have those experiences, Ricardo? Yeah, right?
Yep.
And so we were scrambling to get things together. So this, because they had to sign before they left. And so this gives us a little bit of grace. But those expectations of the daily live interaction, all those things would start on day one regardless.
But realistically, a student could go 30 days with nothing in place.
No, the contract can be signed. You have to get it rolling, but you don't have to have the contract signed prior to initiation.
But you have
Which-
to have the kid operational.
Which goes back to your question, and I want to hold that for the other item because that's more the logistics piece that exists outside of the policy itself.
Before the commit.
Yeah, and then this course-based independent study really is, it's more secondary related, but it also applies to our junior highs because course-based conditions, because there's a provision in here, and I believe it'll come up when I go through the administrative regulation that, and it goes to your point as well, Linda, about you can set up where a kid's partially on independent study and partially not. So you could, it's more based towards course-based. Let's say Ricardo's teaching chemistry. You could set it up where the weekly synchronous is child's going to come in one day to do lab, because the A through G portion of chemistry there has to be lab experience, right? And so there could be a provision to set that up that's distance and in and out, and that's really where this course base refers to. And that talks about, again, courses required for high school graduation. This is more secondary based, but I'm going to recommend that we leave that in there, because as we figure this out for junior high, I believe some of those elements are going to be applicable. Because, in elementary, a teacher's credentialed to do the whole 9 yards. At a junior high where we've got single subject credentials, this is going to be a little more difficult to resolve. And so this is all the course-based pieces as well. And then the student parent educator conference shall be held as appropriate, but not limited to as a re-engagement strategy. These are all the records that have to be maintained. A listing of the students by grade level, program, and school who participate in independent study. This will be reported through CalPADS. A file of all agreements, which has always been the case. Yes. Was that in that piece? I was trying to remember.
200, just after home and hospital.
Yeah, I think I've got that lined out in the other, as I go through it in the recommended piece, but remind me if we don't, John, when I get through there. And then this, down at the bottom of this page, the district shall document each student's participation in live interaction and synchronous instruction on each school day as applicable, depending on whether it's TK3 or 4-8. And then this is a student who does not participate in independent study on a school day shall be documented as non-participatory for that school day, which goes into that accounting for re-engagement.
So is the student participating recorded as in video recorded, or is it noted?
No, just the documentation of.
With the,
Yeah.
like a log is kept.
Yeah, and it does talk specifically about So here's the record: a written or computer-based record, such as a grade book or summary of a summary document of student engagement for each class, all grades, assignments, and assessments. So it's
non-participatory, that's absent.
right. I mean, this is almost the same conversation we had last year over that, right?
Right.
The engagement and participation.
Yeah.
It's the same concept applied to independent study now. So that there is some way of monitoring on a daily basis whether or not the child is making progress.
Sure.
And so then the program evaluation, this was in our board policy previously, and it's just that we're going to evaluate the effects. You know, how are kids in independent study doing versus those that aren't. So this is and again, I apologize for just fire hosing you with this, but this is these are the legal requirements for independent study at this point. And so this is the proposed piece. And let me see if I believe I lined that piece out, John, when I get down to the bottom. So the recommendation would be to eliminate our existing and just include the SB 130 compliant language. All of these CFs are a reference to an existing policy. We don't currently have all of those in place, but this is going to be a roadmap for us to go through and make sure that I mean, it's not that we're not doing those things, but we don't have a specific policy. So this is the same language about engaging, verifying the information for the re-engagement plan, the master agreement.
And all the paperwork for audit.
Yeah, all the stuff that you know, when you used to sign that single, right, that document, that contract always included all these, the 1 through 8s.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So who's in charge of independent study?
Well, historically, Melissa, are you on?
I am, sir. Do you want me to respond?
Yeah, do you want to address that while I go through this piece?
Absolutely. Historically in this district, it's been under People Personnel Services because really independent study, to the point you're all making, was really about attendance and less about, you know, academics. It was really an attendance, a recouping of ADA attendance, right? Yep. Since then, you know, we've really taken advantage of COVID, right? As many districts have, is what are things we can get done. One of the things we got done over COVID in partnership with PPS and with teaching and learning was those short-term independent study contracts that we're hearing about, right? That would still be in place, the under 15 days. Those have all already been done for the year so that there's no more scrambling to get that information. Pacing guides were used, our curriculum was used, and at any time in the year when if someone has to go out, we already know about where they'd be, and all of the curriculum is already there and ready to go. An office manager, whomever, attendance clerk, would just download that, print it, and you're ready to go. So that's a huge piece that when I'm looking at this, we don't have to worry about that, which is nice, right? So that piece for that short term, that's a change in our practice. We used to be very one by one, and we were not approving many of those independent contracts because we didn't have the manpower for one person to do all of that. And so now with this new system, and you'll hear a little bit more from Bijou later around job descriptions, really developing out that People Personnel Services to be using our time a little more wisely there, right? That was not a great use. So that piece is done. The piece around who now owns independent study, it really is going to be from here forward a deep partnership between PPS and teaching and learning and really school support, because it's about attendance, but it's much more about academics. This is about an academic model. That's what we presented to you in the reintegration plan. That's why we foreshadowed. That's why we waited and we learned from other districts, because phase 4 completely addresses this. So Linda, breathe, right? Like this is, we knew this was coming, right? We listened, we read, we learned, and we suspected that this was going to be coming. What we have to figure out now in partnership, and we've been having those meetings, and I owe Jose an email because we knew this was coming out, is that we've been meeting some folks from my office and then some folks from SMEA representation, trying to figure out what does the model look like, right? Like we have all the bones, we have all the equipment, we've done all of that, but what does the model look like? And again, we land on always so much easier in elementary. Just, every road ends with, but then junior high. And so we know that'll be a little harder, but from this point forward, independent study, that long-term, and this piece we're looking at, definitely a partnership between the two. It is academic based. And so that we have to have that, and it's got all those accountability pieces from an attendance stance. That cover it, Luke?
Yeah, no, thank you. And so, so this is just the policy statement about these are all the things we will commit to. And again, I'll talk a little bit more about what Melissa alluded to in the reopening piece, because we've begun some survey data, so we've got a starting point on this. And so that is the board policy. I didn't, the actual direct allusion, John, to adult ed is I removed from the AR, but I left it in the board policy. Yeah, just because we may, you know, at some point in time, we may, because some of this won't remain in effect. Hopefully this becomes a way where we got kids starting taking courses at our high school, right? Yeah. So that we're doing some of this combination. So that we got kids in a unified district. We have that opportunity to do it. I used to have 8th graders walk up to the high school campus and take 9th grade courses in some instances. And so I want to leave just that because it's a policy piece. The AR really talks about, we eliminated those pieces out of the administrative reg because that's not included. And so that is just a policy. So again, this is a real bum rush because we've got to have a policy in place. And again, it just got published by CSBA last night. What we will do is continue to dig in, like Melissa said, we're going to meet with the employee groups to talk about, okay, what's the actual implementation operationalizing looks like. Easy for me to say, but that's the policy that stipulates all the legal requirements. Okay, and then so what I want to do is quickly go through the AR. Because this is one where the AR is actually shorter than the policy. Not hardly ever. Right? The policy is usually a brief statement. In our instance, this is our current administrative regulation, talks about opportunities, equity, has the actual minute calculation, because again, as Melissa said, it was really an attendance accounting thing. And this is how we calculated out whether or not the apportionment was earned during the independent study contract period. This is interesting. No more than 10% of students enrolled in Opportunity School class or program shall be in independent study at any given time. That is not included in this new because this is really a wide open thing for 21-22 only at this point. And then these are all the required elements that have to be part of the contract: student name, address. So this was our administrative regulation. Much of that is now included in the board policy, the SB 130 compliant board policy. So the new the proposed administrative regulation from CSBA. See, and this talks about all the different things, how we operationalize this in our AR. Request independent study at least 7 days in advance of the absence. Classroom teacher fills out the student registration form. So like Melissa talked, we had a real cottage process to this whole thing, which made it more challenging. And the expectation under SB 130 is you've got to provide this. And so the administrative regulation, the CSBA model starts with the definition. So live interaction means interaction between the student and classified or certificated staff, and may include peers, provided for the purpose of maintaining school connectedness, including but not limited to wellness checks. So it could be an in-person check-in, progress monitoring, provisions of services, and instruction. The interaction may take place in person or in the form of internet or telephonic communication. So that was the question that you're asking before, Linda. Synchronous instruction means classroom style instruction or designated small group or one-on-one instruction delivered in person. So there is a provision for in person. In the form of internet or telephonic communications and involving two-way communication between teacher and student. Synchronous instruction shall be provided by the teacher of record for that student. For the 21-22 school year, the district shall offer independent study to meet the educational needs of students as specified, unless the district has obtained a waiver. There are some small districts that have the ability to apply for a waiver through a neighboring district, and to refer to a neighboring district or through a county office of education. As we're the biggest district in the county, the county office would not have the capacity to support what we may be looking at.
This could be huge.
It could be very huge.
So if we were to take on students from other districts, does the ADA that they generate come to us or go to their home district?
So there was a survey that preceded, I'm going to birdwalk your question before I answer it. There's a survey that preceded the meetings that we had with the county this week. And the question was, do you intend to offer independent study? I said, yes, right, in some form. Said, will you offer support to, neighboring districts? I didn't answer that question because, and again, I'll talk about this in the reopening piece. We haven't weighed our circumstances yet. So I can't commit to anybody else until we know what our scope is. So I didn't even allow that question to be answered because I said I'm not ready to talk about any of this at this point. Yeah. The district's independent study option shall be substantially equivalent in quality and quantity to classroom instruction to enable participating students to complete the district's adopted course of study within the customary time frame. Students in independent study shall have access to the same services and resources available to other students in the school and shall have equal rights and privileges. Students participating in independent study shall have access to internet connectivity and devices adequate to participate in the educational program and complete assigned work. So that sounds a lot like distance learning.
And Luke, I would imagine we have to provide those resources, correct, in terms of the tablets and the hotspots and all those types of things, correct?
I mean, this is where Brian probably walked out of the room because he knew I was going to say he figured this out last year.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, our IT staff and our sites did a remarkable job of responding. So we know we have the capacity.
Didn't we put those antennas up, those hotspot antennas?
Yeah, he's still got some information coming in on those. Then there's some specifics about eligibility and non-contiguous counties, and it can't just be independent study should not be available to students whose district residency status is based on their parent guardian's employment within the district boundaries, which is why they're asking for this. If somebody's filing a waiver, are you willing to help out? So it can't just be on an interdistrict transfer. And then here's all the monitoring pieces again that talks about the re-engagement piece. This is to the question before about the responsibilities of the independent study administrator. So this, as Melissa said, this is really going to be a partnership. Here's the responsibility of the teachers. Each independent study shall be coordinated, evaluated, and carried out under the general supervision of a district employee who possesses a valid credential. The ratio of a daily attendance can't differ from what your normal ratios are. And so here's all the responsibilities of a supervising teacher.
Sounds like there's independent study teachers.
Well, not necessarily. And we'll talk about that when we get to the other piece, when I show you the data. And so so what I'm proposing is that we adopt the CSBA language because it aligns with the SB 130 requirements. And it really, the real valid points are defining that live interaction, daily synchronous instruction. Oh, I must have pinched it. Because if a parent makes a request that based on their child's health condition, they'd have to be afforded the opportunity for independent study based on the parent's decision.
Can we require documentation from a doctor? No.
No, I don't think it would hold up because it says flat out based on parents' decision.
Especially with the way COVID is going
Yeah.
now with the
Yeah.
health strain, it's affecting the children. So of course, parents want to keep their kids home.
And again, I'll talk about that a little more because I did have a conversation with a parent Friday, and I'll share that with you, and it's pretty compelling.
Yeah.
Oh, here's the piece that I crossed out, John. It's in the administrative reg, students 21 and older, 19. This is the beyond graduation part and the continuation opportunity pregnant minor program. So with that change has been incorporated into what's at your place setting. So again, normally we'd go through this and then you'd have the opportunity to review, but based on the fact that, you know, we've got to get this up and running by the time school starts.
There you go.
I'm recommending that we adopt the policies as the modification as they stand in front of you.
Yeah, we're going to be ready.
Yep.
In spite of the many questions that we are still rolling around in our heads, is there anyone willing to make a motion?
I'll make the recommendation that the Board of Education approve board policy and administrative regulation, BP AR 6158, independent studies as presented.
A second.
It has been moved by Mr. Lara and seconded by Mrs. Flores to approve board policy and administrative regulation 6158, independent study. All those in favor signify by aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Item 7B, Mr. Beecher.
Thank you very much, Ms. Cordero. I want to start by just kind of introducing several of the next items. We have RFPs coming to the board tonight for services that we've traditionally just done based on our experience in contract recipients. There was a lot of conversation about whether or not these services, because of the amount of money that's involved, required, again, a formal process and a level playing field before awarding a contract. Reviewing the federal statute, it looks pretty clear. Reviewing California purchasing regulations, it looks pretty clear that these require a formal process like this, except we can't find anyone who does it. Big districts and small districts and districts in other states, we haven't found that district yet that says, yeah, we do that too. But out of an abundance of caution, we have taken this first pass at creating a level playing field and having a rational and defined evaluation process to select vendors and bring for your consideration tonight. We're going to continue to look for something to really firmly hang our hat on how exactly to proceed with these things for the future. But for right now, reading the black and white parts of the regulations, they're required to be led by a formal process. So I want to give you that introduction just so that you understand why you haven't seen these before. They haven't come to the board as long as I've been here. I don't think they ever have. This is our first pass at kind of creating a scope of work for these types of services, and then to create a process for evaluation. So Patricia McKnight, the coordinator for purchasing, Dr. Zimmerman and personnel, Rochelle Aziz and their team, all of them did a lot of work to try and put this together so that we could bring these to you tonight. And I just want to make sure and acknowledge that they helped us take this journey for the first time. And it'll get smoother and smoother as we go. So with that introduction, I'll speak to a certain extent about what the process and what the outcome is. And then again, Dr. Zimmerman is here to kind of speak more specifically about the services that these folks provide, should you have any questions about the work they do for us. So again, this first item, RFP number 5188, talks about our family outreach advocates. This is Margot and her team. In the past, they've had Margot +4. The RFP we put out was for Margot +5, so it does increase the services. We did have 8 potential bidders download the documents to evaluate whether or not they wanted to participate and submit documents. So even though what you see here tonight is just one person submitting it, we did have 8 other potential providers evaluate whether or not they wanted to jump in. And then you can see, based on the process of this one, they did meet the minimum criteria and provided us with a cost not to exceed of $450,720. I know, Brian, if you want to kind of jump in as well to kind of talk about the service side of it.
Yeah, so our family outreach advocates, they work with the clusters of schools, and what they do is they provide assistance when parents have trouble accessing resources. They're the ones that go and they attend meetings with them. They'll come to the school. They really help facilitate making sure the parents follow through with all the interventions that we have possible, and help them navigate the system, help them get medical appointments, help them get in with mental health resources. And they really have a lot of they have access to the different resources in the community, and they help parents access those. So it's really a really beneficial service. It used to be Margot was it by herself, and we found that the need has grown, that we need more of these folks like Margot to go and help. And that's why we had 1 per cluster, and we found more of a need. So we wanted to do 5 this year.
Hey, Matt, can I just ask one tiny point of clarification? It's actually for Ricardo. Are you familiar with the difference between the RFP process and just doing bids?
No.
So maybe if you could just let him know what the difference between the RFP process is and what we usually do.
Absolutely. So a hard bid process is something you really use when you have an idea, just one project that's going to be delivered. And then you describe that project in as much detail as possible. And then people who do that kind of work will submit what's called a hard bid. In order to complete that project for you, I will charge you this much money. And you basically determine that they've met all the requirements in their bid document. It's a big formal document that describes the project and their qualification. And in the end, the evaluation is based on cost, period. And so the lowest cost provider on bid day with a complete packet gets that contract. When you're dealing with any of the RFP, RFSQ, which is a request for statement qualifications, there are a few different iterations of what that request for might be. Then you're given a little bit more leeway in establishing a criteria as far as here are the ways we want to measure the best candidate out of those who participate. So in this instance, we've got a cover letter that we're looking at, the organizational background, what's their history, the ability to implement activities, and then a reasonable proposed cost of services. So those are the criteria we used in this request for proposal to score and then compare. Use that kind of rubric is a word I know we're all familiar with, to say, here's how I want to say measure these segments of this business, and that's the one we want to do business with today. So thank you, Mr. Hollinshead, for asking that question so we can get that clarification out there.
Can you elaborate, Matt, on the public contract code?
Oh, yes, I can, and I will limit my comments to say that the public contract code is a set of regulations that define how we can contract with outside agencies. Generally, it's scoped to construction work, but really it is a lot of the guidelines and regulations we are required to follow in establishing a level playing field. Again, because we're spending the taxpayer's dollar, right? Taxpayer money comes through, and that's not a voluntary transaction. Right? They must give us their money based on the taxes that they pay. There are controls put over government agencies to make sure that we aren't only using discretion in spending those dollars, that there's guidelines that we have to follow to make sure that we aren't doing favors for friends or family, things like that, so that the public can trust our outcomes, that there's transparency during the process, and everyone knows or has the chance to know by doing the research on the public contract code exactly how to successfully do business with the district.
And do you have any idea, Matt, why we only received one bid for this particular project?
I would speculate that of the 8 providers who looked at it, only one knew exactly how to do the service because they're engaged in it right now. And others reviewed it and said that's not our niche, right? Our service area looks more like, describe their service area. If they do something more connected to social work, if they do something more connected to community work, but not necessarily engaging with families in a school district and the services that they need to access education, it's a niche. And so the number of folks in an isolated area like Santa Maria that are going to be able to do that work are going to be pretty small. So that would be my guess.
It was looked at by 8 different groups or
For sure.
person. Yes.
So we post this on Planet Bids, which is our electronic bid tracking and communication system. And so the notice of this bid went out to 82 vendors that are registered on Planet.
Wow.
We had 8 folks who actually downloaded documents to see if they might be interested, and we received this one response.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
And Matt, do we have the ability to negotiate the price? I mean, it's only one bid. Like, what if they had said, we're going to charge you $5 million and they were our only bid? Does that force us then to accept that bid, or can we negotiate? How does that work?
That's an excellent question. If this was a hard bid, our options would be to reject the bid or to accept the bid. Because it's an RFP, there's a little more leeway. But again, as part of the scoring process, one of the criteria was a reasonable cost proposal. So as we went through the process, we evaluated that and scored it accordingly. And so in that evaluation, we determined this cost was reasonable and we would be doing the cost for this amount. I mean, if, again, Mr. Valenci, once we engage in that negotiation and say, we'd like you to do this for, you know, any number, they would then have the opportunity to say no, right? And then where does that leave us, right? Because what we do need is to provide these services to our families and our students. So the answer is yes, but as part of the process, we make sure that by the time it comes to the school board, we're ready to say yes to the number they provided.
Any other questions? Is there a motion?
I'll move to approve the award of contract for RFP 5188, Family Outreach Advocates to Family Service Agency of Santa Barbara County as presented.
I second.
It has been moved by Mr. Hollinshead, seconded by Mrs. Flores, to approve the award of a contract for RFP 5188, Family Outreach Advocates to Family Service Agency of Santa Barbara County. All those in favor signify by aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. 7C, RFP 5189, Family Support Services Resource Center. Mr. Beecher?
Thank you very much, Ms. Cordero. I got a bit ahead of myself there. Again, a similar process was used to create a level playing field for the Family Family Support Services Resource Center. We had 7 potential bidders download the documents on this one, with only one providing it. We used similar criteria as far as how to evaluate this bid, and Mr. Valenci, as you asked, we did determine that they did have a reasonable price as far as the cost of this service. And this is our current provider and the current structure. So Mr. Zimmerman or Dr. Zimmerman, again, if you'd like to kind of touch on the program and what we're doing here.
Yes, so the Family Service Agency, that's the Healthy Start building that's located behind Battle School. So that is our outreach advocates there help connect students, our families with services. They have parenting classes available for single fathers. They have classes for parents, you know, setting limits with their students. They have a number of resources. They get them with housing. They have housing, insurance, dental programs, resources within the community. So they are there to help provide, to connect families with resources. And the family outreach advocates, again, they come in from the FOAs that we just approved before. They go and they help take them to these meetings, make sure that they follow up and ensure that there's follow up with the families, and FOAs, the ones that we approved before, connect them with other resources like teen court, other classes, and other resources in the community. But the Family Resource Center there is just a wealth of resources for our families in the district, and they serve a large number of our families through the referrals that they receive.
And how many, I guess, employees are there? How many advocates, or whatever we call these people?
I want to say I don't have the exact. I want to say it's 7 or 8 in front of me. 7 or 8 is the rough number that that work there, and I'm going to say they had 7,000 referrals last year that they processed. So there's a large number of families that they do serve.
And I'll add, just to be sure, I asked that question also. I have that there's a supervisor. There are 8, as Dr. Zimmerman said, family advocates, and then there are 4 parent educators who provide these services.
Okay, thank you.
Hey, Matt or Brian, on all of these that we're going through, one question down below, it says 1 year with 2 one-year optional renewals. Would it be for the same family service agency, or will they go back open to bid since they were awarded this contract this go around?
And this is new to me, so I think Matt can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe the bid is good for 3 years, if I'm correct, Matt. And then after the 3-year window, so once we've completed 3 years of service, then we reopen it again to the RFP situation and we go back.
Right.
Thank you.
The asterisk to that is if we're finding, let's say that they're not able to place the staff that we need, or there are other issues, which there haven't been. Like I said, a lot of these are providers that we've been working with in these services already. But if there was something that came up, we do have the option at the end of each of those 2 years to let the contract terminate and then go back out for a request for proposal again. And that's why that comment is there. Thank you, Mr. Lara, for asking that question. I forgot to clarify that. There is an extension for each year.
Yeah, that's what I noticed when I read them all.
Yeah, and then after 3 years, we will be required to go back through this process.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Is there a motion?
I'll make a motion that the Board of Education approve the award of the contract for RFP number 5189 Family Support Services Resource Center to Family Service Agencies of Santa Barbara County as presented.
I second.
Mr. Lara moved, Mrs. Flores seconded. The motion to approve the award of a contract for RFP 5189 Family Support Services Resource Center to Family Service Agency of Santa Barbara. All those in favor signify by aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Item 7D, RFP 5191, Homeless Education Services.
Thank you very much, Ms. Cordero. As you described it, this is for our homeless education services. This is a service that exists in the district today, provided by Fighting Back. The staffing that is listed in the RFP is for 2 FTE to provide those services. You can see that the reasonable cost proposal came in at $150,000. And again, Dr. Zimmerman can kind of describe more for you what our relationship is with them and the work that they do for our families and our students.
And yes, so these are our two family, our two homeless liaisons that we work with Fighting Back. And, 25% of our students experiencing homelessness in the district, they work a year round. They work as not just a school year calendar, but they continue to case manage these families and making sure that they're connected with resources, making sure we get a call on Friday morning that a family has been removed from their house and they need somewhere to go. They ensure that they get into the homeless shelter, or they get them into a hotel, and they have services. They get Salvation Army involved, they get the food bank involved, and they really work closely with these families. A lot of work for 2 individuals, but they do it extremely well. They are go-getters, and like I said, they work full year. They don't work just the school calendar, they work year round.
A question that I have is, what are the qualifications to be one of these advocates? Is there like a minimum type of like formal education level, or do they go through any types of particular training? How do we know if these folks are qualified to do this work?
The hiring is handled by Fighting Back. We describe what we need, and then they hire the folks that they think will deliver that service in a way that will allow us to continue to fund that activity for them. But we're not necessarily involved in that strict human resources kind of function, because that's their role as the employer, is to make sure that they place the right people to meet the needs of this RFP.
The reason I ask is it seems like a really critical position, really critical, roles. So I'd want to make sure that we have, people that are extremely well informed of all the various resources that are out there to support our homeless population. And correct me if I'm wrong, but homeless, it could also be 2 families sharing a home, correct? If I'm not mistaken. So it's not just, we're not just talking about somebody, who's what most people think is out in the street. And so we know that that affects a lot of our students. And so I want to make sure that we have highly qualified folks to do this work, especially if we're paying them, 75K a year. It seems like if that's split evenly, I'm not sure if Fighting Back keeps a portion of that. And so I'm not sure how much they pay each of these employees, but that's why I asked the question. It would definitely behoove us to make sure that we know that we have highly qualified folks for those positions, just like any other position.
Absolutely. And the other part, just to put your mind at ease a little, is we have, there's a monthly meeting that we have with each one of these agencies, with FSA, with Fighting Back, with CADA, who contracts with other services. We have monthly meetings. If there are any issues that do arise, they're addressed in these meetings. And I'll tell you that the leaders, Steve, Melissa, and Edwin, all respond extremely promptly. And if there are issues, on our end where they're working outside of their scope of what they should be doing, they let us know, and then I follow up. And so we have a really good working relationship with these outside agencies. And if there are any issues that come up, they are addressed immediately, and we take care of them.
Well, I'll just throw in my 2 cents worth in terms of, what does occur is, while the agencies do operate independently, there is a lot of collaboration. And if things are noticed in one situation, it's referred to another. And so it's not just those 2 people, working with our homeless families. If things arise in other situations, then it really is a collaborative effort to address the needs of that family, and the other agencies may step in to offer assistance in ways also. So.
This agency has been hard at work in our area for a number of years. I don't remember how many years, but their track record is exceptional, and they do a lot of good for our population, for students, and for our district. I can't remember, is it Steve that comes to LCAP? Who comes to LCAP? It's Steve. I mean,
Steve Delira from FSA, yeah.
Yeah, he comes to our LCAP meetings also. And so there's a real buy-in in the community effort.
Yeah,
And
Steve, Edwin,
action.
Melissa, all participate.
Yes, yes. Mm-hmm. So in attending those LCAPs, he shares really good information too with our parents at those meetings in terms of how we're moving through district efforts, and how the community and his agency, or the agency he works for, is working through their agency to make things better. I'm glad they got the bid, because they are very familiar with how things move in our district and in our community. And maybe in the future he can come to a board meeting and maybe give us a little update on some of the things that they are doing, because we haven't had time with COVID to have that opportunity. In past times, we've gotten to really know people because they come to a board meeting and share some of those things with us. And so those are important aspects that, maybe now with COVID on the decline, hopefully, we can open up and have those visitation and updates. They're important.
There is a large degree of intercommunication. I guess that would be an appropriate word.
If not, we will add to it with his other words that he's making up.
Not just within, but, with, with the whole community. And I mean, even, the work with our interpreters,
Yes.
when things arise out of meetings and questions come up, they're referred to, or others are contacted to get in touch with that parent or families. I think there's a pretty high level of satisfaction, I guess is the word, with our families in the community, with the support that they receive from SMBSD. So.
I think you could just follow Margot around for about 3 hours and you'll see what what takes place with that agency and the people she works with. She's
And then-
done a lot for the district.
I can only keep up with her for about 20 minutes.
That's all you need. She's homegrown, grew up in the area.
Is there a motion?
I'll move to approve the award of contract for RFP 5191, Homeless Education Services to Fighting Back Santa Maria Valley as presented.
I second.
Mr. Hollins had moved. Mrs. Flores seconded the motion to approve the award of a contract for RFP 5191, Homeless Education Services to Fighting Back Santa Maria Valley. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Item 7E, award of RFP 5192, Outreach Mentor Support. Mr. Beecher.
Thank you very much, Ms. Cordero. Our Outreach Mentor Program, at one time they were called Outreach Consultants. I think that there's a certain connotation that comes with being called an orc. They're not always the most positive characters in the movies that I've seen them in, but Outreach Mentor obviously depicts the work they do supporting our students. You can see that we did have a couple of providers, 2 different providers. On this one, we did have 10 potential vendors drop down the bid documents to consider providing a response. You can see that the other provider was out of Stockton. They did have quite a bit of experience doing this kind of work, but my recollection is that a lot of their services, if not all of their services, would be done virtually. And we're looking for in-person services with the potential to do virtual services. And so I think that impacted their score. But you can see that the Family Service Agency did provide a qualified bid, and their cost, while a little bit higher than Faith in Action, they still overall scored the best based on their response. And again, Dr. Zimmer, if you can please add to the conversation about what the services these folks provide for us.
So these are our outreach mentors work. They're at the school sites and they receive their referrals. We really refined the referral process how they receive them, because they used to have caseloads of up to 250 kids where they couldn't actually give these kids support. So they are, as it says in their names, they are mentors, and they help with tier 2 level behaviors for students that are struggling socially. And so they're referred through a cost meeting, an SST meeting, or through an administrative team meeting where a group of individuals really look at who the kids are, what is the priority to get them in. And then they meet with the kids, they set goals with the kids, and they follow up with them every 8 weeks and determine, should we increase service? Should we decrease service? Should we keep service as is? Should we bring them back to a cost meeting and look at possibly moving them up the level to an MFT, which we're going to talk about in the near future in a few minutes. So that's what they do.
And a question that I have is for that contract of 1.2 million, does it matter if they see 10 children throughout the year or whether they see 100? Do we as a district pay that same amount based on that?
We pay the same amount, but there was, those are the conversations that we have in those monthly meetings. Whereas if we start to see caseloads are low, I start working collaboratively with the principals and saying, all right, and the outreach mentors and saying, okay, what can we do? And I work with FSA and say, look, there's low numbers here. We need to maximize our service. There are more kids. How can we start finding them, or what processes do we need to do in order to target these kids? Because again, we do not want to pay this amount of money if the services are not being fully utilized. And this is going to come up in another topic as we follow into the board meeting. It'll come up again. So good question.
And as a quick follow-up, the social and emotional supports that are available, is there like a hotline that is available to our students or our families where they can dial one number and be able to be referred to the appropriate places where they can get social emotional supports?
Absolutely. Yes, we have, there's a suicide, all of the junior high students have a suicide response numbers that they can call on their ID tags. And all of these, we have safety at all of our schools. And all school administrators have hotline numbers to provide to families if students do need social emotional support. And with the crisis response things that are happening with online learning, is all of these students have our devices. We do have a crisis response protocol where we do follow up if we start to see internet searches that involve self-harm or depression or anything like that. They're flagged by securely, which we have in all of our computers. And there's follow up with the crisis response teams. And these numbers are provided to all of our families to ensure that they have these resources and can access that.
Thank you. I'll make the motion that the Board of Education approve the award of a contract for RFP number 5192, Outreach Mentor Support to Family Service Agency of Santa Barbara County as presented.
It's been moved by Mr. Mancias.
Aye.
Carries. Item 7F, award of RFP 5193, Therapeutic Services.
Thank you very much, Ms. Cordero. You can see on this item, we had much broader participation as far as the submission of request for proposal. We did have 16 potential bidders download the document, consider participating. We did have 5 of them submit proposals. You look through the table, you can see the implications of the larger cost numbers and what they had on their cost score in particular and their total score. So you can kind of see how the different pieces work together as we make that evaluation. One thing that I'll note is that this level of service has recently been provided by 2 agencies. Through this process, we're kind of consolidating that effort with 1 provider, and the one indicated with the highest score and the #1 ranking is CADA, the County Council on Alcoholism and Drug Abuse. Again, I'll invite Dr. Zimmerman to kind of describe the services that are provided through this.
Thank you. Yeah, so these are the folks that they work with our tier 3 students. So as we go, outreach mentors deal with the tier 2 level students. When we start to see students that are severely depressed, they need medication, or they have a history of social emotional issues that are severe, we involve the MFTs at our school site. So every school site, we used to only have a number of them, but that we saw the need for all school sites to have them because all schools have these tier 3 level students. And we do keep the caseloads because they are intense. Again, they follow the same process as the outreach mentors. But they have a caseload of about 20, but they start with each student and it's referred through a cost or an SST or an administrative meeting. And they set goals with the students and they follow up every 8 weeks and determine, do we need to increase, decrease, or keep the services the same? And do we need to reassess this in a cost meeting or an SST meeting? So these are the ones that really help the students with the greatest social emotional needs in our school sites.
And Brian, did I hear you correctly that you said we have 1 MFT at each of our sites now?
That's correct. And there are school sites that decide if they see a greater need than what we provide as a district, they will fund it through their own site funds. So that has been the case in some instances.
And then just think of that one slide that we showed this morning. That's really what Brian's referring to is all of those mental health supports. A lot of those, most of them fall under Brian's shop.
Any other questions?
Just as a quick follow-up, how do we ensure that our families know about these services? Do we provide like monthly reminders through a newsletter? Do we send them a message through Parent Square? How do our parents know that these services are available to them and their youth?
We don't do a parent, so that topic has come up, and if we were to advertise that we have these kinds of things available, with a school of 1,000 people and only 20 slots, it's a matter of if parents come to us, we can inform them that, we have these levels of services available, but we will, if concerns come up, we will go through a referral process. We'll take it to a meeting and then we'll determine that level of service. But we don't want to guarantee, if we advertise that we have, MFT services, if there's 1,000 families that all want an MFT, we don't want to upset 1,000 families, because it's really about, refining that referral process to who really needs an MFT. But we do let families know when they come in and they say, we have, my student's been Googling this, or I see that they're depressed. The administrator takes that, brings it to a cost meeting, and then we let them know, hey, we have these different levels of services we can provide, and we'll let you know, we'll have this meeting, and then we will determine what we can do. And then again, once they start with a service, we'll determine after 8 weeks where they progress. Either do they need to continue, increase, or go to that next level.
And again, in just creating that through line, I can't help myself. This is exactly what we were talking about, is that streamlined process of at the site level, knowing who to send to what when, right? Like, who do we send? How many can be on a caseload? Making sure we're keeping those caseloads high because we know there's a need. But that folks are immediately able to meet those needs quickly because we have some really strong processes in place.
Any other questions? Is there a motion?
I'll make a motion that the Board of Education approve the award of a contract for RFP number 5193, Therapeutic Services, to the Council on Alcoholism and Drug Abuse, CADA, as presented.
It was moved by Mr. Valencia, seconded by Mr. Hollinshead, to approve the award of a contract for RFP 5193, Therapeutic Services, to the Council on Alcoholism and Drug Abuse, CADA, as presented. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Item 7G, award of RFP 5194, Truancy Mentor Support.
Thank you again, Ms. Cordero. Similar process being provided here as far as, again, creating that level playing field. We did have 7 potential bidders download the documents to consider participation. You can see that only one submitted. It is our current provider of these services. There are 4 folks that are truancy mentors, and then there's also a bit of support, a half an FTE set aside for the support on the SARB board. But again, Dr. Zimmerman can support the details as far as the program and services that are offered.
So the truancy mentors, they work with our students, and this is something where we've, in collaboration with Fighting Back Santa Maria Valley, and these monthly meetings that we have with them, we've really refined how we utilize these folks. So there's one truancy mentor that is that works with each cluster of schools. And what they do is they work with the students who are either they go to a level of truancy where they receive an administrative meeting. So the levels of truancy process go a letter for truancy, second infraction when they get 6 unexcused absences is an administrative meeting. And then after that, they go to the school attendance review board at 12 unexcused absences. So either students who have been at the administrative meeting level, or they go to the school attendance review board, they are referred to these truancy mentors who work with them to promote positive habits with attendance. They work with families, they meet with families, they provide resources, they attend school attendance review board meetings, they attend administrative meetings as well at the school sites. And they're also part, when we were talking about the independent study and students that aren't attending for 60% of the week, then they were part of our reintegration process with COVID. When we had those students who had reached that level where they aren't engaging, they're sent out to the homes, they visit, they determine what are the barriers that are keeping you from engaging. So they would be a part of this re-engagement process like independent study as well. So they're out in the field. When we did have COVID, they continued to work with our families. And they are year-round employees. They don't stop during the summer. They still work with their caseload of students who they have and their families over the summertime to make sure that when we do come back to school, that they continue with those positive behavior habits.
Any questions?
Brian, how do we assess the effectiveness of these truancy mentor folks?
So we look at the data to see how students are progressing, if they do go on to the SARB level, and then after that, if they do progress into the TMT, which is after the SARB level. I'll say the last year has been difficult because with COVID and everything else, there hasn't been much of a SARB process. But in years past, we find that the more that these students are being worked with, that it is a big help because we determine what the barriers are and then how we can support the families, and we hook them in with resources as well. And they have it's not just hearing from mom and dad, but they hear from somebody that they've built a relationship with, that they re-engage. So our numbers are better with SARB, that less students being referred once we start engaging them with the truancy mentor.
There's also a level of accountability built into the LCAP process because these are LCAP funded ventures. And so there's very strict accounting, and Rebecca shared that with you many times, to make sure that we're getting return on investment so that we're supporting kids in the way in which it was intended. So very close progress monitoring done through both departments to ensure efficiency.
Thank you.
Is there a motion?
I'll make the recommendation that the Board of Education approve the award of contract for RFP number 5194, Truancy Mentor Support to Fighting Back Santa Maria Valley as presented.
I second.
It is moved by Mr. Lara, seconded by Mrs. Flores, to approve the award of a contract for RFP 5194, Truancy Mentor Support to Fighting Back Santa Maria Valley. All those in favor signify with aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Award for RFP 5196, Youth Court Diversion Services Program. Mr. Beecher.
Thank you very much, Ms. Cordero. We're almost through with the RFPs from business tonight, but we're not quite there. So with this one, we had 6 potential bidders who downloaded the documents. Only one submitted response. It is our current provider of these services. It does call for 2 FTE to provide these services for us. And again, Dr. Zimmerman is here to provide more of a program description and let us know what we do here.
So Teen Court Services, it used to be we would refer these students so that it works with students from 10 years and up. So it can be as young as 4th grade all the way through 8th grade. But these classes used to charge families for these services to attend any kind of diversion restorative justice programs that they have available. We found that the need was so great that we thought, as a district, we want to cover that and make sure that when we offer to parents, it's free for them. And we've been able to utilize that. So it offers classes like conflict resolution, drug and alcohol classes, crime awareness, I'm blanking. They have a peer review system where they actually go in front of they have a peer group of jurors that sit in and determine what kind of consequences their peers should have. And like they'll sign them up for classes and do these things. So there's a number of things, a number of restorative interventions that we can provide to families and to students we want to be proactive on this end with, do it before it gets to that behavior, but also if we have to be reactive in nature, unfortunately, because sometimes that happens where we fall into that, we want to be able to say, these are the consequences, but we also have these things to help correct that behavior and to help make it better. So that's what we have with our teen court classes, and it's really been, it's a great resource for our families in Santa Maria Bonita.
I think we need a drum roll.
I do have a question, Linda.
All right.
Going back to what I was mentioning earlier, Brian, is there a way to pay for services rendered as opposed to a flat fee? Because let's just say hypothetically that there's like a 50% drop in absenteeism for this coming school year. I'm assuming we would pay the same rate regardless, the 191,000. So have we ever considered things, or is that even an option to pay for services rendered as opposed to this flat rate?
It's not to exceed.
Yeah.
So usually, yeah.
Yeah, so it won't go over. I understand that. But let's say only 10 kids, hypothetically, right? That's a dream, right? Only 10 kids are struggling with absenteeism this year. We would still be paying, it sounds like 191K. So is there a way to do it for services rendered as opposed to the full 191K if it's not fully needed?
Well, I'm going to say that we have, with that paying for staffing and paying for services that they provide, I'm going to say I don't believe so, but Matt may correct me. But I am going to, in my next presentation, I'm going to talk about some of the things that we're doing to really maximize our services with our outside contractors that we have. But again, these things are addressed, like when we don't have the numbers that we should be having, we do bring these up in these monthly meetings to make sure, again, because if we are paying the bill, we want to make sure that we don't have, it's kind of like having a class of 3 kids. That's not maximizing. It's great to have, only 3 kids and they can get that, but it's not maximizing the resources. So again, that's what we do with those.
And I can't answer the question, Valencia, but what I can do is say, in my mind, if what used to happen is they would bill families for services rendered, I wonder that they don't do the same currently, and the estimate is 150, but I need to look into it to find out the answer to that question to know for sure. I mean, it sounds like Dr. Zimmerman believes that because they're staffing behind it, there's just a flat rate, but I want to find out for sure, and I can put something together for the update. Make sure you get an answer.
Thank you for that. And I do appreciate that we are investing district resources in this program because it sounds like it's having a good impact. It sounds like the peer review process, right? It almost sounds sort of like we're preparing students for things like to be on juries and things like that in the future, right? Civic engagement, if you will. It sounds like a bit of like restorative justice approaches, right? We're trying to do everything in our power to support them. And so I think that's wonderful. I'm really glad that we are taking on that role as a district to support our students.
And Dr. Zimmerman, you alluded to speaking to another one, but this is the last RFP.
Well, the dairy products really.
Okay.
I'm
if
kidding.
You have something to say about?
I do have something.
I did not see the connection there. I am really, really sorry.
There's going to be a lot of kids skipping school because of spoiled milk. I can't go there. There's bad milk.
Way to milk your time, Brian.
Okay.
That's utterly ridiculous.
Way to go, Brian.
Okay, that woke us all up. Is there a motion?
I'll move to approve the award of contract for RFP 519. Youth Court Diversion Services Program Council on Alcoholism and Drug Abuse audit is presented.
I'll second.
It has been moved by Mr. Hollinshead, seconded by Mr. Lara to approve the award of a contract for RFP 5196, Youth Court Diversion Services Program to the Council on Alcoholism and Drug Abuse, CADA, as presented. All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Motion carried. Item 7I, board authorization to allow the superintendent to award RFP 5195 dairy products. And before we go into this, because I went to the taste test, I would like the specifics of what the students, how that went, which I know wasn't included in this. And anyway, I just would be curious to know.
Did you do the taste?
I actually did not. I'm not a milk drinking person, so I'm not sure that I would have been a very good judge. But I did walk around and, kind of watch the kids, how they did it, and when they, circled their happy or their sad face. And, some of the kids were pretty vocal about, ooh, this is good. Or I don't think anybody said, ooh, yuck, but.
Okay.
And of course, the reward at the end,
Was
which
the cookie.
the cookie.
How many
Yeah.
smiley faces got those?
But they were encouraged to choose the one they liked the best to drink with their cookie. So it was a very valid process.
I also want to thank Matt for inviting us to that opportunity.
Thank you, Matt.
It was really cute how serious they were.
I really enjoyed watching the coverage. I had a meeting that conflicted, so I know not all of us, not many of us got to be there. But Carlos Murta did a great job leading that activity with the kids, coordinated with Eduardo Ponting and Patricia McKnight and Angela Gudmans to make sure all that came together. Really neat to let the students have a voice. If you remember, we awarded a bid, I'm going to say 8 years ago, because I think the number's bigger than that, where the milk was not very well received by the students. The school board got a few notes, a few letters about the milk tasting kind of waxy, and there are a few other adjectives they used. So we thought it'd be best to evaluate their opinions on the front end, and that's what we've done this time. I think we did it the last time, but I think we only had one provider. But nonetheless, I don't know the specific numbers, Ms. Cordero, but there was a preference for the new provider, which was surprising. I thought that familiarity might win the day because Producers has been our provider for a long time, but Crystal.
Oh, really?
Crystal Creamery.
Which one?
Crystal. The
Oh.
three folks who provided samples to us, it was Producers, Altadena, and Crystal Creameries. Crystal was the one that was liked the most by our students that day. So that was really great information. For the most part, they liked the flavor of all the milks, but there was a slight favorite for Crystal Creamery. To step into the bid process here, this is a hard bid. We do take into account the input from students, but the National School Lunch Program is, for certain sizes of contracts to make sure that you're maximizing federal dollars, that they do strongly weight cost in the evaluation. We have done a structure like this in the past. The board may recall authorizing the superintendent to make awards like this if the timelines just can't match with when the need for the goods or services or the project are in a board meeting. We've received bids from 2 providers, Crystal and Producers. Altadena did not submit a package for us to evaluate, but that is really recent where we got those packages. We haven't really even begun to evaluate them. So we will be requesting the board's authorization to allow this process to conclude with the superintendent's award. We know that the flat dollar amount quoted without any evaluation so far is Crystal has provided not to exceed amount of $881,000. and producers at 718,000. But a lot more work has to be done in evaluating those submissions before we can put ink on a contract and proceed. But we won't have a chance before the start of school to make that happen and our next board meeting. So we'll request your authorization to give the superintendent the authority to act on the results of this RFP process so that we can move forward.
Only if you taste the milk.
I'm kidding, I'm kidding.
Now, I have a follow-up question. One of the things that I've been looking at is research around like lactose intolerance, particularly in communities of color. There's a higher rate of lactose intolerance. And so especially as people age, over time, many communities of color develop an even larger intolerance to dairy products. And so something that I'm wondering is, has our district ever considered alternatives to milk? So we could still provide milk as an option, but have we ever considered things like soy milk or almond milk or oat milk as other alternatives that our students can choose from?
So as a staple, we provide milk. And then as an alternative, it's kind of in opposite. As an alternative, if a student has dietary nutritional needs, then they can be put on a structured health plan from the nurse who makes a recommendation to food services, who then tailors their meal plan within whatever their restrictions might be. So if that does occur, we can offer those alternatives.
So if a child or a family says, hey, like we prefer them to drink oat milk, for example, then they would have to go to the nurse in order to get that approval to be able to have.
What I heard you say was prefer.
Yeah,
That's a little bit different than being required because of dietary reasons, like having a dietary restriction.
Yeah, so yeah, let's say they just prefer it. Let's say they don't even, let's say they just prefer oat milk over regular dairy milk. Do they have that option in our district?
No, they don't. We're providing free meals based on a national school lunch program that come with specific requirements, and exceptions require that dietary requirement. And if they want to exercise that option, then they can make that choice on their own. But it's not something that we have the ability to offer for free.
Matt, refresh my memory on this. I know we are required to offer the milk. And at one time, we had to make sure that every student took a milk. Do we still have to do that?
There are components of a compliant meal that qualifies for reimbursement, and we still meet all of those requirements. So they have to take each of the 4 or 5 pieces as they go through the line.
Okay.
Yeah, the meal checker, their role is to essentially make sure that occurs.
And so something that I've noticed, Matt, at the high school level is some students will throw away the milk, for example, in the garbage can, like seconds after they receive it, which is rather unfortunate, right? Because if the kid next to him loves milk and can process it well, that student should be able to enjoy it as opposed to it being thrown away. But I have seen that take place at the high school level where I work at, and I do see that.
I think that a lot of our school sites, there's a share table where stuff gets set to the side and then is available. It's an area that I think the health department has become more flexible on. For a long time, they were your food is your food and there isn't sharing, but addressing the concern you're describing, I think they've become a little more flexible. You have to really be careful about time. Because time and temperature are critical when it comes to food safety. So that part has to be closely administered. We can't necessarily stop a student from doing that or force them, because if you don't watch them do it in the cafeteria, then they're going to walk outside and then find another trash can to drop their food in. But again, because what we're doing is trying to provide a compliant meal to every student so that we get the reimbursement that we're needing in order to provide meals to everyone. If there are a few who don't eat and don't participate or throw away, that's unfortunate. But the goal is to make sure that all students have access to that nutrition every day. And so we have to maximize the amount of reimbursement that we can get.
Any other questions or comments? Is there a motion?
I had a comment. I think it's unfortunate that we have dairy products and expiration in the same recommendation.
Okay.
Therefore, I will move authorize the superintendent to award RFP 5195 dairy products to the lowest responsible bidder upon the expiration of time for appeal.
I second. Quickly, I second. And is there a second? Oh, I totally missed that. It has been moved by Mr. Hollowhead. Excuse me. Mr. Hollinshead, and seconded by Mrs. Flores to authorize the superintendent to award RFP 5195 dairy products to the lowest responsible bidder upon the expiration of the timeline for appeal. All those in favor signify by aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. You're right. Aye, aye, aye. And moving on to something other than RFPs, Ms. Beltran, this next items, item 7J, discuss and approve job descriptions. Matt, you're off the hook.
Good evening and thank you. And yes, we are bringing you 3 job descriptions that fall under Dr. Zimmerman's department, People Personnel Services. As we've worked through the past 2 years, and especially with this pandemic, but also with just the sheer number of needs that our students have that we just talked about with all these RFPs, is we've identified a greater need for an additional program specialist in the People Personnel Services Department. Additionally, we've modified the program specialist for health services to really be someone who can oversee the nurses, oversee the health requirements, health curriculum, mental health support, serve as a liaison with public health, oversee 504 plans, and provide training to our health staff from a place of knowledge, from a place of where they have that experience of being a school nurse or working in that area. I am going to ask Dr. Zimmerman to speak a little bit to all 3 positions. We have slides. I think I've shared them with Brian Ricky, who can bring them up, or I can share them as well. But they just provide the bullet points. And, you know, they're so big, they're too big on my screen. I need to make everybody else smaller. So, Brian, if you can go in reverse order. I'm sorry, I gave them to you in this order, but I really would like to see this one first, the health services one. So here is the key components that Dr. Zimmerman identified as being really what is needed for our program specialist to oversee our nurses, because it's been a really dynamic experience and there's a lot that needs to be done. And we really have realized that we need greater oversight, but from a place of experience. Brian, do you want to talk a little bit about the program specialist for health?
Yes, and thank you. I think you hit the nail on the head. You know, we've pupil personnel services has kind of been one of those all-encompassing departments, and it's just had a great variety of things that have been put under that umbrella. And we started a few years back with bringing in someone that was going to be the program. We have Rochelle Aziz right now as a program specialist for health services. However, we found as this position evolved that nurses need oversight from somebody that's coming from experience, that can speak to them like a peer, that can oversee what they're doing and really provide them with the in-service that they need in order to progress and to really build their skill set and to thrive. So, and there's so many other components that have come up, especially with COVID, when it comes to mental health and those kinds of aspects that really is more fit to be overseen by someone with nursing experience. So that's why we looked at rewriting the job description for the program specialist for health to make it with someone that would have a nursing background, that would be able to oversee the health, the mental health, the oversight of all nurses, and be able to provide resources to them to really ensure that that our students and our nurses and everyone in schools thrive with health and mental health. So that was the rationale behind the program specialist for health. And that would require, and it might be, so I don't know, which one would you like me to do next?
I think this one real quick before we move on, I do want you, as you're looking at the job descriptions, to note that we made sure that we ask for someone who is bilingual, multilingual preferred. We additionally put in the same format as our other job descriptions, that it's a valid California Administrative Services credential or equivalent experience education relevant to the essential duties noted above. And we checked with our credential specialist at Santa Barbara County Education Office, and we are able to have that program specialist that's like a lead nurse, but they're a program specialist, they're an administrator. And so they're able to do that. And then we've added all the other components of our job descriptions and really looked at it very carefully as to what the needs are. And Brian Zimmerman and his department did a really good job of updating this job description to really encompass all of the needs of that role. Then the next job description is the program specialist for pupil personnel services. And as Melissa Dutra spoke a little while ago, it also has that independent study component of it. But I will let Brian speak more to this because he's the one who put together this slide.
Thank you. And actually, I'll let everybody just take a look at that. And I've got it printed out here. So what I'll do is I can kind of just talk about it. But I think if you guys, if Brian, if you can forward to what the chart looked like before and then to after. Or,
no, we don't have the chart, Brian. Sorry.
I have it. If it's
I think we're good with that right now. It was determined that wasn't necessary at this point.
Okay, sounds good. So it's really so taking Rochelle away from that position where putting more of a person that was overseeing the health aspect. There's other components of pupil personnel services that are labor intensive. And we looked at what are the big ones that take up a big amount of time with meetings and things like that, where oversight could be given. And we looked at really the truancy component of the district. There's 21 school sites, and all school sites have administrative meetings. They all have SARBs. Really looking at those numbers and monitoring those and being able to attend all of those meetings and be a presence, because when we go to an administrative meeting, it's not just about truancy, it's about a whole kid approach and looking at what kind of social emotional things do they need, what kind of academic things do they need, and her having oversight of those programs for all of the schools in the district is one of those items. Assisting with our foster youth and homeless students and attending the best interest determination meetings for foster students, working with our foster youth liaison that is contracted through Fighting Back Santa Maria Valley, as well as our homeless liaisons, and really having collaboration with them to ensuring that we're maximizing our services. As I mentioned before, it wasn't just about the dairy products that I was going to present. And then the other one is, overseeing those monthly meetings with the agencies ensuring that we have that ongoing communication and looking at where their problem spots at, are we not giving enough teen court numbers to really substantiate that bill that we're giving? How can we produce more referrals? Do we need to have meetings with administrators to see, let's look at these kids, let's look at disciplinary referrals, let's look at students that are struggling, let's pull some data to see, maybe some of these kids could use these interventions, and really ensuring that we're maximizing all of those services. The next part that should be overseen is independent study, and really, since that has completely changed, being the head of that program. So looking at just shifting her responsibilities over that direction, and then having the nurse, someone with nursing experience, take the program specialist for health.
And then lastly, Brian and his team, in collaboration with school nurses, updated our 1989 school nurse job description. And it reflects what current nursing responsibilities are within our district and within the business of nursing, school nursing, so to speak. And Brian, do you have anything to add about that?
I was just going to say, Rochelle and the nurses had a collaborative effort and really expanded what nursing looks like now in comparison to, 1989. So it's been decades since it's been looked at. And they said, these are things that we really, as this position has evolved and students have changed, responsibilities have changed. And this is really reflective of what we do.
Are there any questions for either Dr. Zimmerman or myself?
I just was surprised in the job description for the program specialist and pupil personnel about being able to authorize student work permits. Do we have very many students that seek work permits?
We do. I mean, it's not a lot, but that was my responsibility at one time. So is something she would be doing. You find it a lot. You find it a lot over summer vacation, where the junior high kids who are going to apply. We just had one who was applying to McDonald's, and he's working over the summer, but he needs a work permit to do that. So he has to go through that process, and she would oversee that.
And what is the age requirement for a work permit?
I thought it was.
It depends on the level of work that they're doing, but like for something for like McDonald's, if you're 14 years old, if you have the right GPA, attending school, you have these requirements. And
yeah. Okay. I just was a little surprised to see that. Shows I'm out of touch.
Yeah. Brian, I got just a couple clarifications on the school nurse component, and this may also obviously apply to the health position. We've talked previously about whether or not each site would require specifically a registered nurse, or whether there might be some more rudimentary or basic things that a health aide or medical assistant could do. Could we include then in that nurse the representative duties, and this is for you, I guess, too, obviously, Bijou, oversight of other allied medical professionals as needed? Because if we do have the opportunity to start supplying some of the or hiring other folks for some of the other sites, then I think that's certainly something. I know when Helen Hill was here and was kind of the nurse overseeing the few nurses we had, that was what she did. And then I think on a site-to-site basis or what have you, even maybe in clusters or whatever, that might be something that the nurse that any nurses that we hire in the future should have the capacity to do.
Can I ask a clarifying question of that?
Sure.
Because I'm not sure I'm understanding.
Correct.
Are you asking that the nurses be able to oversee an LVN or a health assistant?
Correct. Yeah, like a CNA or a medical assistant or an LVN.
I will tell you that right now is very, very much the thought by CSEA that the site administrator oversees the health assistant and not the certificated nurse. Now this program specialist might be able to oversee and help guide that work in collaboration with the school site administrator. But that's been, especially with the most recent months of the pandemic, an issue.
Yeah, well, the site administrator is not qualified to oversee them in a medical capacity. That's the problem.
But that would be then this role of this program specialist, health services individual who has that background and experience.
Yeah, well, let me give you an example. If I work, so Medicare requires a physical therapy assistant or physical therapy aide if they're working with somebody in my site to be overseen by a physical therapist or to have a physical therapist within line of sight, depending on what level of expertise they're providing. And so to me as a healthcare professional, maybe the nurses too, it would make sense for them to have as part of their duties that they could, if that person was on their campus, that they would be able to oversee them or what have you.
They will provide them with any professional development, training, resources like that, but it would be at the direction of either the program specialist, the director of people personnel services, in concert with the site administrator.
Right. So if somebody came in with something that was going on medically, they're not going to call that person at Pupil Services, or they're not going to call the medical health person to ask what their advice is on what to tell the aide, is what I'm saying. Or nor is the aide going to call those people. You're creating a chain of command that doesn't need to exist. And all I'm asking is that that part of the representative duties be the capacity to supervise those people. So maybe that's something that we need to talk to CSEA about then. I don't know, but it doesn't make sense. It creates a really cumbersome existence if we want to try to get more coverage and we're not going to be able to hire nurses, then that, all the time.
Yeah.
Issue, maybe there's a distinction between supervise and evaluate,
Yeah,
right? Because that's what I'm hearing.
Yeah, I was just going to say the same
Thank
thing.
you.
Right. Well, we'll have to have a conversation.
Yeah, that would be, to direct or organize the supervision.
Sure.
Supervision becomes its own.
Direct is a great one. That's a great one.
We can have that conversation.
A question that I have, Bijou, or for anybody is have these positions already been flown, or are they currently already occupied with somebody?
No, they have not been flown because we needed to bring them for your approval first.
Gotcha.
Nurses are flown, but under the 1989 job description.
Gotcha. Yeah, and so these are opportunities, it sounds like, for new hires, correct?
The program specialist for health services is a new opportunity. And we wish to move Rochelle Aziz, who is currently the program specialist for health services, into the program pupil personnel services position as a lateral move at this time.
And is there the possibility of also offering the opportunity for other folks to apply for the position as well, now that we also have bilingual, bicultural as a preferred qualification?
At this time, Mr. Valencia, it is a decision to move her laterally to that position as part of our process.
And is that the norm, the process that you're describing, the lateral move? Is that like the norm within our district or the norm within?
No, that's a legal requirement, because if you haven't notified someone that they are not going to occupy their position for the following year by March 15th, they're entitled to that position.
I see. Yeah, and the reason I ask is because we also have within our diversity and equity and inclusion policy, we want to be more intentional with our hiring and making sure that we're recruiting diverse pools of applicants. Particularly, this is a certificated management position, which is also an area, right, where we could use improvements in the diversity of our staff. And so that's part of the reason why I'm asking the question is if there were still opportunities for hiring, which it sounds like there will be for one, I want to make sure that we're very proactive with our recruitment, right? That it's that we're not just waiting for folks to apply, but that we're very intentional about applying where there's applicants of color that might not otherwise know about the position.
We are definitely very proactive in our recruitment and our hiring process, and especially looking for individuals who are representative of our community and of various diverse cultures.
I have A question regarding the RN designation. Are all nurses now graduates of with a BS?
That is the expected degree at this time. And yes, I had Marina Muccio check that with credential specialists as well to make sure that we were having the correct designation there. And Dr. Zimmerman checked on that as well.
Because I know, well, my mom was an RN and she gained her registered nursing, whatever designation, working and going to school through a hospital program, which was quite a number of years ago. I didn't know if they still had those kinds of programs anymore. So
they definitely have additional programs, but there is a nursing pipeline, so to speak, whether depending on where they wish to end up.
Got it.
Thank you for your question.
It's not a 3-year program anymore.
Well, most of the Cal State universities offer a 4-year BSRN, and then I think even there's a bachelor's RN at Hancock.
Which has a waiting list.
Go to Channel Islands.
I know.
Yes.
Can I ask one other question about or maybe actually, sorry, it was 2. One for Brian on the program specialist for health services. In the duties, Brian, it talks about monitor, supervises safe and drug-free schools and tobacco use prevention, education, health fairs, those kinds of things. Is this somebody that you would foresee being in a role that we've talked about with DARE or the current form of Keeping It Real, that kind of stuff, who might then be able to help us with upgrading and doing some of those kinds of programs and kind of moving into the future? That's awesome. That's great. And then I guess I would say to Bijou, I was curious with that person, since she's making a lateral move currently, even though we already have somebody identified, could we also list as a preferred education and experience an MPH? Or is that too lofty?
For the health services?
Yeah, I mean, I know we already have somebody, but just so we have for the job description for the future.
No, we don't have anybody for the health services position. We have someone currently in the health services position without any nursing background or experience.
I see.
So what is it that you wish to add into there?
MPH for preferred education and experience, master's in public health.
MPH, you got it.
Thank you so much, you guys.
And I have
Masters in public health preferred. I will add that in.
And I have a follow-up question, Bijou. I noticed in the program specialist for people, personnel services job position description, in the knowledge, skills, and abilities portion, it still uses the language of high-risk students or at-risk students. I noticed that a couple of times. Does California legislation now make that illegal to use those descriptions for our students, which are often stigmatized based on that description? And
Brian, can you speak to that? Because I know you've talked about at promise instead of at risk, but
yes,
I think these are specific.
That's not actually, it's not official.
Right.
And so we haven't switched over to that in any of our documents yet, because that's not, that hasn't been adopted officially. And so I think we were waiting until that language officially came into play.
I see. Thank you, Melissa.
Thank you. Any other questions or potential edits or additions? Anything?
No, that's great.
Thank you all.
So I have a point of order, for you, Mrs. Cordero. Do we then move on these, since there are some, just with the understanding that those few edits or changes will be made, rather than wait to have it presented to us again? We can do that, right?
We have in the past as well.
Perfect. Okay, I just wanted to be sure that we weren't going crazy or something.
No, it's a good question,
another
Mr.
Wednesday
Hollinshead.
night.
We've had numerous where we've had to add the bilingual, multilingual preferred, but that is now in my brain. I will not.
I noticed.
So is there a motion?
I make a recommendation that the Board of Education, make sure I have the right one.
Approve job description.
Approve the job descriptions as presented.
With the recommendations of Mr. Hollinshead, correct?
Yes, with the changes as requested.
I second.
It has been moved by Mrs. Flores, seconded by Mr. Valencia, to approve the job descriptions as amended under item 7J. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any noes? Motion is carried.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, we are moving into discussion, and we're moving past item 8A. Really, I passed third grade. To item 8B, American Rescue Plan Act Elementary and Secondary School Relief Fund, ESSER 4, Safe Return to In-Person Instructional Local Educational Agency Plan. That's a mouthful. All right, Ms. Dutra, this has your name attached to it.
It does, and so I'm happy to pass it right over to Ms. Herrick, our Director of Plan Alignment. Thank you, Rebecca.
Thank you, Ms. Dutra, and good evening, board members. Let me move you over here. Can you see my screen?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
You only have 3 lines after ESSER.
I know.
There are 4 on our paper in our board packet.
Oh my goodness. Well, I am going to be reviewing the American Rescue Plan Act Elementary and Secondary Relief Fund, which is also known as ESSER 3, and it includes the Safe Return to In-Person Instruction Plan. So as a quick reminder, the American Rescue Plan was signed into law by Congress on March 11, 2021, and has provided and will continue to provide elementary and secondary school relief funds, also known as ESSER funds, to state educational agencies. So part of this for the ESSER assurances, we had to submit for funding, which Mr. Beecher did in June. We had to review the statute options and complete the template. The template is basically a form that we had to fill out within 30 days after submitting for the funding. And in this form, we had to make some decisions about either rewriting our plan, reentry and safety school plan, or writing a new plan. We also have to review our stakeholder input and review the reentry and safety plan. So when we looked at reviewing the reentry and safety plan, we have to revise and complete that plan. And we also have to do this every 6 months. And as you know, things are changing. And so this is one of the things that we'll have to continue to do. We also have to complete a new plan, and it is called the ESSER 3 expenditure plan. So this plan is very similar to the learning continuity and attendance plan that took the place of the LCAP plan last year, and we'll be working on that. We do need to seek stakeholder input, and we will provide the information and seek input from our LCAP stakeholder team, from our DLAC members, and also from our school site council teams. We will present both plans at school board meetings. In September, we'll present the reentry and safety plan. And then in October, we'll present the ESSER 3 plan. And then we'll make both plans available online. So allowable uses for these funds, 20% is restricted to learning loss intervention. And then we use these funds, of course, to address the unique needs of low-income students, children with disabilities, English learners, racial and ethnic minorities, students experiencing homeless and foster care youth, purchasing educational technology, school facility repairs and improvements, maintaining health and safety of our students and staff, preventing and preparing and responding to the coronavirus, and providing mental health services and supports. So I just wanted to quickly remind you, this is what our 2020-21 school reentry plan and safety plan looked like. And this is what we'll be updating. So it has to include a description of the current public health conditions, general health and safety procedures. And so some of these might include some of the changes like social distancing between students' desks, that type of change that might take place, testing, reporting, trainings, procedures. It might include the meal distribution with any new guidelines. The other part of the plan, it has to include continuity of instructional services. And so some of the things that we have to include that all students are able to attend school on a daily basis on a regular schedule and have access to high quality grade level instruction. Students who learn from home have access to grade level high quality instruction, and that will be following the independent study guidance. And then mental health and social emotional well-being also has to be addressed. We'll also be looking at the acceleration of learning for all students. And as I mentioned before, increased support for technology needs and expanded parent engagement and outreach. So I did include this evening, these are the guides that have been updated. They're federal and state guides. And so these are the things that we'll be looking at as we update our plan and write our ESSER 3 plan that also needs to be completed. So I'm wondering if you have any questions at this time. I know this is a really quick, it's just an overview. We've done a lot of research of what this looks like, and I'm here to answer any questions.
Rebecca, I only have one. You said that this was going to be presented in September and then voted on in October?
The safety plan and entry plan, that will come to the board in September.
Right,
and then in October, the ESSER, the other plans.
Funded.
There's two plans.
Okay. So why the return plan at September if we're already, just curious, if we're already back in school, it seems kind of a little bit late. Is it because we've already done this your whole the stuff we did last meeting and all that?
No, I mean, we could bring it forward in August. It's just kind of the number of days we have to complete the plan. So that's something that we could look at.
Okay. No.
Yeah.
I'm just asking.
Yeah. And when we look at that plan, all the departments will need to come together and kind of,
sure. People leave out.
Yeah, definitely.
Rebecca, would anything change if for some reason we have an outbreak with COVID again? Would we have to redo the plan? Because just from past tense and past happenings, I'm hoping not, but you just never know. So would that have to be redone if public health comes out with other directions?
Our plan is really flexible and provides the different things that could happen. If this happens, this is how we respond. Okay. I think Mr. Ontiveros will be going over a lot of what will be included in the plan on the next item. But it has to be flexible. We do need to update it and review it every 6 months, but I think we've done a good job so that we won't have to redo the whole thing. It's a great question.
If you heard something I hadn't heard yet, so. I don't want to hear it, but just in case. Thank you.
And my question, Rebecca, is what was the amount that our district will be receiving? I know that it sounds like there's the 122 billion. That sounds like it's at a macro level. What are we receiving at the district level?
And so this is our third funding with the ESSER funds, and we receive it's a little over 30 million.
30 million per year?
30 million. And that is goes till, and Mr. Beecher could correct me, it's till June 2024 that we have to spend the funding.
Gotcha. And it mentioned about meeting the unique needs of low-income students, of racial and ethnic minority students, which we know is the majority of our district. How are we using those funds to meet those unique needs?
And so there are many ways that we're using the funds. This aligns with our LCAP plan and other plans. And the funding is provided to us, Mr. Valencia, the same way that title funds are provided to us. And so some of those students are unduplicated students, so they fall into several of those categories.
And so essentially we're using these funds the same way we're using LCAP funds?
Not the same way. These are to meet the needs due to COVID-19. And so as I outlined in the plan, we use them for, I'm just going to get my notes here.
So Rebecca, while you're looking for that, if I can just add, it's really important, especially when we're getting a lot of one-time funding, that we really keep focused on, we have a plan, right? And that the funding then supports the plan that's put in place. So it can easily be every time we get one-time money, especially right now, that it's like, what are we going to do with that money? What are we going to do with that money? It's here's our plan, right? And then all funding we get funnels into supporting and making that plan as robust as possible. So it's not like we're piecemealing for every single funding dollar that we get. And there's also with one-time funds, we have to think future when we see things like all day 1 to 12 TK, right? So we're thinking about long-term goals. We have short-term goals that we need to do for kids right now that we've already planned for. And then what are our long-term goals that some of this money's earmarked for, and how are we planning towards that as well? But we don't chase the money chases our plan based on student needs. And we've presented, I know we've presented that quite a bit.
Yeah, because what really impresses me about the funding is that it's very, very specific, right? It says we want to address the unique needs, right, of low-income students, of ethnic and racial minority students. So that's what I'm curious about is since it's talking about the unique needs, we know that, for example, many of our students are recovering from the global pandemic. There might have been, a loss of life in the family. There might be a great deal of food insecurity. They might be dealing with homelessness. So that's what I'm curious about is how are we using it to meet the unique needs of our students, as opposed to students that are coming from more affluent communities.
Everything that you just described, our teachers we've been doing that, right? Every single thing you just said was present prior to COVID. So our teachers understand unique needs. We understand unique needs. Are we there yet? Are we perfect at that? No, that's why we use this to really create our robust plans. But many of those things you said are not new. And so we're ready for that. And we're going to continue, right, to stay on course with our plan so that we can support the students that we know really are in need and that we've got to close those gaps for.
In addition, I'll add that these funds have kind of come in layers. I mean, they're labeled 1 and 2 and 3. And so we kind of acted based on priority on each of those funding sources and layered them into addressing student needs. A lot of separate supplies, a lot of unique supplies, a lot of health and safety equipment, a lot of things that came in to help make school a safe place. And then we're looking at even broader, as Ms. Dutra mentioned, broader long-term goals where we can have an impact on air quality now and well into the future by improving ventilation and mechanical systems. That wasn't necessarily possible with just the funding coming from the state and ESSER $1. ESSER $2, maybe. Now that there's ESSER 3, it opens up other possibilities to help us really make some long-term improvements for some of our facilities that have antiquated ventilation and mechanical systems, so that we can actually use those systems to improve air quality.
That, and Matt, to echo your comment, that was, and Melissa's, that was in the plan before. That was part of the plan, was to try to work on the ventilation and the safety of the classroom. So it's where I think that's a great example. And I think, you know, just like we had the 10% set aside for folks that needed to be used earlier with the money we received before, now we've got the 20% that's designated for learning loss mitigation. So there are some things where we know we really kind of need to use it for. So I think, and I have no doubt that you guys will be turning over all the right rocks and doing all the right things. You always do.
Well, and I saw technology on that list of things, and in order for us to have provided a device for every single one of our students and address the need for connectivity, that had to have been huge. And to maintain that, you know, through the independent study requirements and, you know, to address learning loss, whether it's in person or virtually, I think those are all key pieces that we've been looking at and working toward for a number of years.
Yeah, that technology piece is a great example, Linda, because we were already on that path before all this began. So back to Melissa's point, it was in my slide this afternoon, you know, plan the work, work the plan. Let's keep working the plan. How do we strengthen the plan so that we're going deeper on needs, not just identifying another set, because the core set really is what makes the difference. So this is a great, I love the comments because, you know, John, your point of why September? What's the federal government, right? That's just, they just picked a timeline. So for us to be able to make sure that we're getting stronger around that core and continuing and building the layers around that is going to really build that sustainability that will make a difference long term. Because to Melissa's point about, you know, one-time funds, there's a, you know, I believe it was, you correct me if I'm wrong, Matt, Ron Bennett used to always say, don't use one-time funds for things that eat, right? Right? Because it's gone, right? And so it really is that's being strategic. And this is a great opportunity to really go deep on some of those elements. And it is ESSER 3. You were right, Mrs. Cordero. There shouldn't be 4s on those two. Because I was thinking, how did I miss ESSER 4 already? We haven't even got ESSER 3 yet. But I'm old.
Okay, any other comments? Thank you, Mrs. Garrett. And I will acknowledge receipt of the American Rescue Plan Act Elementary and Secondary School Relief Fund. 3, safe return to in-person instructional local educational agency plan. And with our thanks. And moving on to item 8C, school opening for the 2021-2022 school year. We're not into 2023 yet?
Well, on ESSER terms, I believe we are. But, and so I guess I'll introduce this by, you know, same song, different verse, right? Because it's really, it's the same, those same core elements.
Yep.
And so again, I appreciate bearing with me, plowing through that independent study piece, just the policy piece. below the line piece, right? So now the operational piece really is the next phase. And so what I want to talk about is where we are with reopening in general. And it's going to allude to many of the things that Rebecca was referring to in her presentation around ESSER 3. And so there's a whole bunch of things, but I want to focus on just two primary considerations because there's a lot of weedy things that we could stay here till 3 or 4 in the morning. No, I don't see anybody shaking their head yes, because we can't make coffee in here anymore, right? If we had coffee on, we'd all be welling, right? But I really want to focus on two big, one is the health and safety, which is obviously, Vita, your question, right? What happens when? And that's been in our mindset the entire time. As we built these plans for reintegration. Oh, thank you, Ricky. There was and this wasn't really submitted as a public comment. I think did all the board members get this email on July 11th?
Yeah.
And there was a follow-up on the 17th. Yeah. The individual's not named, but I did want to reference this because, people submit information and I want to make sure it's in front. So this is the one dated July 11th. It's Hello School Board, and it's from jdogdj@hotmail.com. Normally on a public comment, our bylaw is you have to state your name and address and all those things. We have it on those forms, so it's become a little different in COVID. Pardon me? Oh, that's the second one. I'm reading the first one first, was just JJ. So anyway, it says, thank you for being a part of the great Santa Maria Bonita School District. As a parent, we're very excited to go back to school in the fall to see all of our friends and great teachers in the district, but we want to go back to school with no masks. If you want to test children before walking on the school grounds, like taking their temperature, that's fine, but no masks, please. Please look at all the important options before making decisions for our children and workers. We want to go back to school in a positive way with no masks, and we can do it. Why are other states have no masks in schools and we are still thinking about what to do this fall? This is a key aspect for all kids, and teachers need to go back to school with no masks, no social distancing. Did you know that many USA schools stopped wearing masks at the end of last school year and everything was fine? If you want to, you, the school board, have the power to make it an option to parents and teachers. Give the choice to the families, and yes, you can do that. Please look over all the true research studies on masks, and you will see that masks get highly contaminated with bacterial germs and have other major issues too. My child did not like wearing a mask at all when we were in summer school and that last month of the school year. You want your own children to wear germs on their faces all day at school? Has the school board talked to other school districts inside and outside the state of California on how and why they made their choice in this matter? What policies do they have in place? Has the school board taken a survey with the parents and teachers on this matter? We think that SMBSD is a great school district and we should open up schools with a mask policy that is up to the families, or better yet, a no mask policy. Please think about this. Other states and districts are starting school with no masks, and we should follow those examples. And the letter on the 17th was almost identical with a couple of changes that cites some cardiovascular health, particularly oxygen and carbon dioxide intake. For each student throughout each school, and monitoring that is the only way to ensure the health and safety of each student within the care of school staff. And then attached to that was some research, and so this is at your place. So that comment was made, and someone takes the time. I wanted to make sure that everybody had seen that. So,
is it valid research? Like, is it from the CDC?
I
Is
put it for you to read. It's from a website called Daily Skeptic. Question everything, stay sane, live free.
Yeah, and the reason I ask is is just like I was asking earlier, right? How reliable, right, is the research that
it's a public comment, so I can't really comment on other than sharing the public comment.
Gotcha.
Right? I mean, it's not, and again, it's just to make you aware that submission was there. And so really what I wanted to do is just go through again what we've learned since June 23rd, because we did this update when everything was kind of still in the balance on the budget and the guidelines. And so I want to talk a little bit about health and safety, because the California Department of Public Health did issue guidelines for K-12 schools last week. They are available. I believe I shared them in the Friday update, right? I forget from day to day. Oh, my internet's really slow. And so I just quickly want to zip through the core elements of this because it goes back to the point that Rebecca was making about ESSER 3. We're going to have to come back and update our COVID safety plan built around these new expectations. So this is from Public Health. It's on the Public Health website. And in bold right there in the center, the foundational principle of this guidance is that all students must have access to safe and full in-person instruction and to as much instructional time as possible. I think we can all give a big amen to that. We're ready, right? And so Public Health will continue to assess conditions on an ongoing basis. Vita, this is kind of the foreshadowing to your question. And will determine no later than November 1st, 2021, whether to update mask requirements or recommendations. And I say that just in direct response to the comment that was submitted, because what is in the guidance at present, masks is point number one, are optional outdoors for all in K-12 school settings. K-12 students are required to mask indoors with exemptions. There are exemptions if there's a health condition, and that was in our plan originally. Adults in K-12 school settings are required to mask when sharing indoor spaces with students. So that's the public health requirement. So I get it. I mean, I've been watching this, debate for masks, no masks for a year and a half now. But the guidelines from California Public Department of Health is that in schools, masks will be worn. And especially for us, because there's, there is no vaccine for under 12, and the vast majority of our kids are under 12. That's the fixed variable that we're going to work with, or the fixed element we're going to work with around this plan. And then there are some, there was, when it originally got released, the original guidance said that if a child comes without a mask, schools are directed to send them home. That may be what prompted some of this. That changed within a few hours of release because Public Health said, no, we're going to leave it up to school districts how they want to deal with that, right? Because we want kids in school. We don't want to be sending them home without a mask, right? Because I got to tell you, when I was 11, if I knew I was going to get sent home for doing something, I would have done it, right? And we want to give kids every reason to keep them there. And so we have masks. I mean, again, kudos to our business purchasing folks. I mean, we have masks. Mr. Beecher's made some connections with United Way. We're going to get more donated. I mean, we're going to do what we can, everything we can to keep kids in school. Physical distancing. Recent evidence indicates that in-person instruction can occur safely without minimum physical distancing requirements when other mitigation strategies, masking, are implemented. And that's consistent with the CDC guidelines. So that was our big concern, when we came back, that we had that 6-foot physical distancing didn't work for schools of our size. But for us to be able to logically space kids in rooms, ensure that they're wearing masks according to the requirements, were good. Back to the point Matt was making, ventilation recommendations. Ventilation should be optimized. Javier and crew have been out re-looking for the, 5th or 6th time at every school site. Recommendations for staying home when sick and getting tested, and they've changed some of the guidelines for symptom checking and things of that nature. Screening, testing recommendations, case reporting. I don't want to get into that too much because that really is part of the safety protocol. I'll mention that in a minute. There are some changes, some quarantining that depends on whether you've been in a mask and some of the contact tracing. Hand hygiene still remains the same, right? So for us, when we talk about that safety plan, we're going to have, we're talking about more, we had basically had 50% of kids on campus during the hybrid. We're going to bring back the vast majority of kids. We're going to have to make sure that we got access to hand washing stations, to hydration stations. The cleaning recommendations changed a little bit. In general, cleaning once a day is usually enough to sufficiently remove potential virus. And there was a big summit last Thursday that the county put on the risk management office from the county put on around what those protocols are. They're supporting all the custodial staff and what that looks like. I don't know, Matt, I don't know if you've heard, I can't see you on my screen, but are we still going to be doing the fogging that's curling up all the paper on my desk?
The fogging is no longer going to be required. That was an additional step that we took, but with the cleaning, what we'll do is step down into more of our normal operation.
Yeah.
As far as how we handled things in 2018-19 in the beginning of 2019-20. And then, you know, as part of that protocol, as we were talking to Javier earlier this week, they did, in response to if there were a few cases of flu that were reported in a classroom, they might disinfect that classroom just as a response. They'll follow that same protocol, right? Just responding to what's happening on the campus to make sure that we have a safe environment for our students.
Yeah.
And if I may, we're finalizing those changes with our CPP committee on Monday.
Oh, Bijou, you're stealing my thunder. That was on my next slide.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay. I always like it. I always like it when I know the plan.
Good one, Bijou.
You know, recommendations for food service. You maximize as much as possible when eating, because that's when we know masks are going to come down, right? And so it's all the stuff we've learned. You know, and I'm so impressed going around the community and seeing families, kids wearing their masks. You know, I'm getting a little tired of it, but you know what? When you think about this is for the common good, it's worth it to know we're going to be able to get kids back in school. And so, and then so this last piece to Bijou's point, the COVID-19 safety planning transparency recommendations, to get those folks back together. And we've got representatives of CSEA and SMEA and our management team. Really, what do we know? What's going to work at our sites? What are the things that we had to do before that maybe we want to consider doing? To your point, Vita, because do we want to have to do it again? And I want to give, Matt Harris probably isn't still on, but he and I meet a couple times a week, and he has been the best trooper working in this building about, are we really having to do all those things still? Because we're all still wearing masks, right? And because OSHA originally allowed us to back off, and then they tightened up again, and then what is it? Just this week, right? Or last week, Friday, LA County said you got to wear a mask indoors. Santa Barbara County came out Tuesday and recommended, not a requirement, right? So Matt Harris has been the best thought partner in this. 2 mornings a week, we talk about, okay, what would be the worst thing that would happen if we stopped doing it and then we had to do it again? Is it worth it to hang on just a little bit longer? So we still follow the arrows, right? Because we got into that practice. So maybe at schools, I might keep the directional thing going because it helps traffic flow, right? Not just a health and safety thing for COVID, but it just helps generally. And so we really want to have those conversations about what are the best practices. And when we make a change, to know that it's a change that we're not going to have to redo. Because your question, Vita, is the one that wakes me up 8 times a night, right? So I share this because this is the first piece. Again, as we've gone through this whole thing, our first knothole has been public health and safety. And again, I give the board total credit for keeping that focus, you know, and making sure that has been priority one, because I know it has not been easy, because we want kids back in school. So we will be updating, as Bijou, stole my thunder. We are bringing that team back together on Monday. And again, I give Bijou, Matt, Sean, Javier, Carlos total credit. They've been taking this and running with it, been communicating with those folks all along, been keeping those conversations alive, because as much as we are grateful that things have gotten better, we got to be committed to make sure that they stay better. So we're reconvening those employee teams on Monday. And then the second piece is what I reviewed in the policy, and this alternative to in-person instruction, right? Because that board policy really says that if a parent feels like it's not safe for their child, you have to make an offer. And so I talked to a parent on, I'll share with you in a minute that we sent out a preliminary survey last week, not identifying, because we were still trying to play chicken. We talked about this last board meeting, we were going to survey. Well, this stuff didn't come out until last week. So we were trying to play chicken because, again, I hate to make the same mistake twice, although I've done it a billion times, right? But when you can hold off on something long enough to know that you've got a foundational piece. So we waited for the guidance to come out, and we just did it anonymously, not by name, but by school grade level, just so we could measure and weigh. And I'll give you the data and where we are at the moment. And I say we, Tammy Castillo-Schiffer did it all. She was just sitting there right there a little while ago. Put her team together, we put the survey together, we got data back. But I had a father who called Friday morning, and he said, you know, my son was in kindergarten at Miller last year, and that was, you know, it was a rough kindergarten year. I said, can't even imagine, right? He said, but he did really well. He went back in hybrid. He did really well. We're so grateful for all the support he got, the support we got as parents. And so he got the survey, and there was two things. One is, do you intend to return in full-time instruction 5 days a week, or would you like information about alternatives as a result of concern about health? And he said, my wife and I have been talking about this every day. We don't want to send him back till he's been vaccinated. How am I going to counter that argument? That's a mother and father talking about their son. They thought about it long and hard. So I said, that's really why we're trying to get the survey. I said, because you're not the only one. If I had a 7-year-old, I might think the same way. And so, Melissa alluded to this when we were talking earlier about independent study. You could see this coming, right? Because the point you made, Beat, about we got to be prepared for the fork in the road to come again. And that was really that phase 4 piece of the return to instruction plan, to get people to try that simultaneous instruction. Because that's really what this, at least on the elementary scale, you know, we talk about course specific. It's a whole nother ball of wax, right? But on the elementary scale, that can work if really dependent upon numbers. And so I want to share with you the preliminary survey results. And this is, Tammy has been updating this. I think I believe this is today. So we got responses since last, I think we put this out Thursday. We got responses representing 9,000 kids, over half of our students. Because we did ask, anybody got in, how many children do you have, what grades? So we just add, without contact, because that contact is gonna have to come from schools, right? We can't have one person here trying to coordinate 9,000 placements. And so this is really preliminary data. We're meeting with principals next week, getting an overview of this is what's out there. And so this is what this is looking like so far. And this is a different chart than the one I actually linked to, so she's changed it since. But it had totals. But of those 9,151 students, 10% right now are thinking, I'd like more information about alternatives. That's higher than I thought it would have been.
I thought it was going to be high.
Yeah,
I did.
Yeah. I didn't. I thought it was going to be maybe 6-7%, but right.
A lot of parents are worried because they're not vaccinated.
Mm-hmm.
The hybrid with the small numbers, they were separated. There was more buy-in, with that, because there was isolation.
Right.
Are you saying because the parents aren't vaccinated, or because the kids aren't vaccinated?
The kids aren't. And now this new strain is a little stronger than usual.
Right, but I mean, I think the other thing is there's a really high percentage of adults that aren't vaccinated.
That's true too. And again, it's different for everybody, but what the legislation says is, if you're concerned about your kid's health, you got the right to an option.
And the question I get is my teacher vaccinated? I don't know that.
And I met with Matt Harris and Jose yesterday. It was just yesterday. Is today Wednesday? Yesterday morning we were talking about that. They are both staunch advocates for everybody getting vaccinated. But they also know we don't have the right to ask. And that was the thing that the father asked me when I was talking to him. He goes, why don't you just ask all your people? And I said, I can ask them, but they don't have to tell me. Just like anywhere else, right? Yeah. And again, I'm not gonna, just like I'm not gonna argue, that father's perspective on his child. We're all gonna do what we think is best. And so on the element, particularly when you look at that TK3 piece, daily synchronous. And I apologize because we have this broken down by grade level and it's not in this specific chart. But if we're talking about 10% of 9,000 kids, double that, we're talking about 1,700 kids potentially. I think once we start making those contacts, other people will, when they learn more, will be, maybe their anxiety will lower a little bit. So maybe that 10 will lower some. But even then, we're talking about 1,600 kids. That's bigger than most of the school districts in Santa Barbara County.
And when I look at the junior high school numbers, they're high.
Yeah, they are. Luke, what?
They can be vaccinated, and many are, but they still are not going to send their kids to school.
Right.
Luke, what came out of, and you're probably, I apologize, you're probably getting to this, but what came out of the teachers who did volunteer to do the phase 4? And
I should just have you guys do the presentation because Bijou's leading off here, following up with. That's a great point, John, and that's Melissa was talking about. She's has reached out. We met with a group right after school got out. A junior high teacher, an elementary teacher, a special education teacher. I don't believe Jose Segura was there, but I think he's been invited to this other meeting just because we knew what was being proposed. And we had a lot of people that, that tried the simultaneous. And when I was talking to Jose yesterday, he said, it was really hard. And I said, yeah, I think it was. And he goes, but there were some people that really got it. And he said, what they did different, he said, they weren't thinking, how can I bring those kids out there into the classroom? It's, how can I think about the kids in front of me? How can I connect them to the kids that are out there? I told him, that's genius. I said, I need to know those names. Those are the people whose brains we need to be picking. Because if we had a lot of people that were willing to do it, and if we got others that can share their success, we're going to get other people that'll say, okay, I might be interested in doing that.
Simulcast PD.
Right, and so taking those numbers and breaking them down, maybe there's one of 3 third grade teachers at a specific school is going to be that plug and play. Or maybe there's 2 and we split those because what we'll do is we will initiate the survey again with the identifying information so that we can start reaching out. And we need to know, which kids at which levels so we can match those pieces up. But based on the requirements of, again, this is where we got to think from the kid perspective. That dad, bless his soul, I'm not ready, but I want my kid to be in school. And so I said, well, really our simultaneous plan was you're assigned to a teacher. This is who your teacher is going to be at Miller School, not any other school, not you got to go somewhere else. And he's going to connect. And then when you're ready or when there's a vaccine, he's already got a school community. He's already got a class. He's already got a teacher. That was the beauty behind that design.
That's the ideal.
That is the ideal. Is it going to be easy? No. And again, that's on the elementary side. That's pretty. I think we can make that work. And I think there were enough people that participated, and we can build that success to get support for each other, right? To go back to what we were talking about earlier today, how do we build stronger learning communities? To Melissa's point, and I'll ask her to chime in because I wasn't in that meeting. Junior high is a whole nother kettle of fish. And I don't know, Melissa, if you want to come on, I can't see people from my screen.
I do want to clarify because I want to honor who's in our group. It's not a special ed teacher. So it's,
oh, I'm sorry.
It's okay. I just want to make sure like we're really transparent, but we're super excited. We meet with Jonathan, Kristen, and Jose, and myself and Nicole and Jennifer, and we've met 2 times. And I'll be honest, they will say the same thing we did. It was really hard to have any traction in our meetings. You had 6 people really wanting to like figure this out, but we had no rules. Nothing had come in yet. We didn't have any information. And it was a little bit of, you know, they were already on vacation. So it was like, do we spend a lot of intellectual effort trying to figure out a model when we actually don't know the rules of the game right now? And so we've really just been waiting to hear about this independent study because we knew there was going to be parameters, but we didn't know what they were going to be. And so really looking forward to then getting back with them. And actually I'll email Jose Rodriguez tonight, but just saying that we might make that group just a little bit bigger because now as we're getting closer, we're into what does that model look like? And we've got to make some decisions, right? But the work moving forward is made easier by, we already have a lot of things in place. We already have, you know, everyone already has equipment, no matter which model we choose. Everyone's already had the opportunity to be paid to practice and get really good with kids. It wasn't just some teachers who did simulcast. It was a large majority who did it. And many were quite successful. I would say all were successful, right? Because if you tried it, you did it and you connected with kids, that's a success. But people would tell you they probably were at varying stages because it's new and it is hard and it's been a year. So all of those things being said, the work that we have to do is we know we have this phase 4. We know that it's been board approved. That was part of our reintegration plan so that we didn't have to keep coming back. Right. And that it's a very flexible plan. If something happens, we move right back into phase 3. God willing, we don't have to do that. Hybrid was incredibly difficult for our teachers, but most importantly, our families. We had many more than 10% out, if you remember, during hybrid, just for a myriad of reasons, but really a big one was daycare and transportation, just because, right, 2 days a week, half day, all of those things. So, we just need to figure out exactly which model that we'll land on because there's a number of different type of simulcast models that folks out there are doing. We ran through some of them. And again, things usually work a little easier at elementary than junior high. A straight simulcast option does work at junior high, but it requires a whole lot more teachers doing it because what happens with junior high is it starts to play with their course of study for a student, right? I have a student schedule. It requires, like, I need to be able to have flexibility in my schedule because these are my needs as a student. I might not have the same schedule as Matt, as does Ricardo, as does Kristen. So the complexity at junior high is high, but that's been the game all along. So we will really work hard. Their team, our team has done great research and like who's doing what, so we can learn from others. And then what works here in our context. Right, because we're our own district and we're often larger than other districts that we look at. So we're going to continue that work hopefully next week because here we are, time to get started. So we'll work with that team and then be able to bring back some strong models. But we have everything in place that we need where other districts right now are scrambling a bit, right? We already have all devices. We already have top of the line equipment in classrooms. So many districts did not get that. So we've got a lot in space and we gave the opportunity. We also didn't walk by all the learning. Our folks at our TOSAs took so much learning and feedback that they were getting from teachers, and we're creating more videos, creating more lessons, creating more supports so that no one's starting at square one now, right? That there has been a ton of learning and a ton of sharing, and that will continue. It's really the role of TOSAs and of site coaches. All of those are meant to support our classroom teachers. Anything else, Luke?
No, you were on the inside of that conversation and I wasn't, so long as you'd be able to kind of share those responses.
Yeah, I feel like we can move now.
Yep. And so then for us, we'll initiate that second survey to identify the specific information, right? Not just what school and what grade level, but who are you? So that we can start doing that outreach and start making those connections, because that's that requirement of the policy. That's that requirement of the AR. And that's why, again, it was so important to get that started now, because, I think 4 weeks from tomorrow is the first day of school.
I know. Luke, has there been any outreach to have vaccinations available to junior high school students? I don't know if they were not able to go to get the vaccines, if their parents work all day and didn't have the opportunity. Have we done any kind of outreach for that age group?
We've shared things that came from public health. We had Scott Robertson we put some videos up in English and Spanish. Specifically, we haven't hosted anything.
I just wondered if that might be
they really hosted things at high schools. Like there was a vaccine clinic at Rigetti. I think it was a week after the high schools got out.
Mm-hmm.
We also have parents organizing. If you remember, Luke, we have parents organizing those things from a community perspective. Yeah. They were sharing at, I think it was DLAC, that they're going out into the community and trying to get families to bring their kids. There's one of the dads, he's amazing. He made Rite Aid or somewhere stay open late because he said there's more families coming, and kept calling them and pressuring them. And he was clear about pressuring them to come. So we also know that there's a grassroots happening in our own district with our families. That's pretty phenomenal. So just so you know that that's also going on.
I know. I asked the neighborhood kids, because a lot of my neighborhood kids are feeders to El Camino and to Bonita, and they're sixth graders, seventh graders, and eighth graders. None of them have been vaccinated yet. None of them. And that's probably 11 kids in the neighborhood that I see every day walk by. And that really bothered me, and I said, well, do you have a way to get to a place? Well, my mom said we can't go yet. And so I don't know if the parents don't know it's not going to cost anything, and we talk about it all the time. And, the two of them are not going to be going back. They're going to have to be according to what Josue was saying, they're not going to go back because they're going to be online, because they have to watch the little kids, because they're not going to get vaccinated. So they're going to stay.
And that's a reality for us.
I know.
Some of the bigger kids sometimes become
they're in charge. They're in charge. Yeah. And they're not vaccinated.
Right.
So that was just a thought. I know we can't do everything, but it's at least we can put it out there and see if there's a resource.
We took a couple weeks hiatus from that public health group with the superintendents, but I got an email today, fired back up again.
Yeah.
With the idea of, what the hospitals have been doing things, but is Brian still on? Do you see his screen?
I don't know. I can't see all the screens right now.
We actually did some outreach to public health about doing something, and they're more working through the hospitals, working through the healthcare places.
We've also sent numerous flyers and parent squares. So anything in the community that's doing that, we've been pushing those out.
Yeah.
So although they're not our own events, we're still pushing those out to our families so that they have an awareness of where they can get those services.
I know. There's a Rite Aid. I mean, it takes them 6 minutes to walk to Rite Aid, and it's like I want to blow a whistle and line them up and take them down there.
Yes.
Yes, that's the thing, because that was my question. What time do your parents get off? Or
Yeah, but again, appreciate the feedback, Vita. We'll push, and that's where the contact from the schools, know families, and really putting families with families. The last meeting I was in with that Masked and Mighty group, they were coming up and meeting with a group of ministers here to go through churches, right? To really, to see. But again, it's such a hot button issue for everybody, right?
And it's like, I think we had to get the polio vaccine, but our parents signed a paper and we got it in school.
Yeah.
You know, we lined up and there was a different grade level. You know, I don't know what can be done with all the laws and stuff, but these kids need to be vaccinated. So scary. So scary.
To be vaccinated too.
Well, that I know, and every news story now they're interviewing the people that are sick with COVID that haven't been vaccinated. That's all you hear on the news now. Yeah,
So-
it's the story, I tell you.
So that's where we are today.
Okay, thank you.
And that's the moving forward is, again, we've got these plans in place. How do we leverage the plans
Yeah.
to meet the need?
What are your feelings on the changes? If there's going to be any changes before the
Oh, I quit trying to be a predictor a long time ago.
Mm-hmm.
Honestly, I mean, and again, it goes back to why we got to have flexibility built in,
Yeah.
adaptability built in, because it could change just as quickly as not.
And it can't.
When it started, it was one day to the next.
It was 1
Amen.
hour
Amen.
to the
Yeah.
next.
Yeah. Well, and here's an interesting thing. I was in an AXA webinar. Every Thursday, I'm in this AXA webinar with superintendents from across the state. And there are superintendents in this county who said, I'm not going to make kids wear masks.
What?
It was before the public health guidelines came
Oh,
out.
okay.
It was, if the state's not going to make them, I'm not going to. And I thought, but again, and that goes back to this conversation I've been having with Matt Harris all summer. Let's don't pull the pin too soon.
Yeah.
Because man, it's hard to start all over again.
Goodness.
Yeah.
That's why we look like zombies right now.
What's that?
I said we look like zombies right now. This is too much on the brain.
This last
Oh.
16 months has been the longest 10 years of my life.
I know. Thank you all.
That's all I got.
Okay. Really?
Really? We're not letting him say any more.
Oh, my goodness. So I will acknowledge receipt of information provided regarding school opening for the 2021-2022 school year as presented. And that brings us to the end of our agenda. Does anyone have anything they would like to report out?
Are we going back to closed session?
Yes,
Yeah.
but we will be going back into closed session, but anything? Well, I already mentioned that I'd been over to Robert Bruce for the milk taste test and had been there the day before just visiting classrooms. And before, well, it was actually the week of our last board meeting, I had been able to get to several school sites during the summer intersession. And I know that next week, all 4 of our junior high schools are going to be offering a variety of programs.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm looking forward to making contact with whomever those principals will be and getting out. The classes were generally small. Kids had their masks on. And even, the few hybrid classes that I was able to get to before school ended, maybe the kids don't like it. I don't like it. Most people don't, but they're doing it. I don't see them, doing, fidgeting with it any more than I do to adjust it or, that kind of thing. They're not pulling it off and, verbally complaining about it. I think probably the biggest problem is just being able to hear the kids when they speak. And so it's, they're happy to be there. They're, working on things that are meant to be helpful for them. So that's been a very good thing. Any last comments, Mr. Ontiveros?
No, I just want, for the study session earlier, I just want to thank you for your feedback on that last presentation, but particularly thank the whole instructional services team for pulling, and that's just the tip of the iceberg of the work going on. And again, so I want to acknowledge the governance role. You get this glimpse through this monthly window. There's a lot of moving parts, and so I want to thank that team and all the teams that they touch and that they will touch in supporting work. But I also want to thank those Matt, all of his RFPs tonight, right? That is, when you think about all those things have been in the LCAP since I've been here, to really formalize that process. I talked to one of the directors of one of those agencies yesterday and asked about it and was told this helped us better formulate our focus in our work. So when you think about, an example of raising the expectations, it has an impact. And I was told, no, it wasn't an inconvenience at all. It really helped us focus. But it really is. And, Patricia McKnight's been talking about this since I've been here.
Vita and
John. Smiling, right, about really formalizing some of those processes, because to everybody's comment, we're making a big investment, right? But it's that collective investment in our kids that really has to drive all that work. And so I want to thank Patricia and Brian and Matt and Rebecca. I know has really is I don't know that she's still on. That LCAP piece has really been the challenge to make sure that we're building some checkpoints and some guardrails around all that stuff. So their collective work, I'm really appreciative of. And beyond that, next time we meet, it'll be the night before school starts.